Reborn as the Viking pirate king. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction, so please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter, and if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 426 Meeting. Viking women. I, the Golden Scale Guard, am investigating a wanted criminal. Stay out of our way. Do you wish to bear the wrath of the Plantagenet family? Katya, in the crowd, drew her spear and gazed coldly at the armored warriors around her. Katya was a different person now. After the siege of Frostwater Village, her prowess in battle earned her a promotion by Odin to Sequence 7, Winged Maiden. Under the Valkyrie path, over the past 2 years, she had consumed potions continuously, rising to Sequence 4, Heroic Guard. Even amidst the siege, not a single trace of fear crossed her face. What the hell is this foreign language? Are they French? Glancing disdainfully at the exquisite broadswords in their hands, Katya's gaze drifted from side to side, finally settling on their jewelry and bulging purses. Her eyes gleamed with excitement when Alfred opened his eyes again. He had returned to the Duke's residence on Rainfall Heights. Upon opening his eyes, the first face he saw was none other than Archbishop Jerome, who was managing the kingdom on behalf of Loki. He struggled to rise from his bed, realizing that all the vassals of Normandy, Satyr, Glor, Duke Phoenix Coldstone, and even Duke Angus Mokrash from the distant valley, had gathered. Your Highness, you have suffered. While you need ample rest, I still need to inquire about what exactly happened in Paris. Is Duke Loki still alive? Patting his cheek vigorously, Alfred recounted their journey to Paris to everyone in the room. Upon hearing that all the Vikings had been killed, including the butler Venzoff, the victim at Versailles, the hot-tempered Glor, the greedy wolf, was the first to snap. What else is there to say? When have Odin's people ever been insulted like this? I'll muster every last troop in my castle tomorrow. If I don't utterly annihilate these French bastards, I'll be unworthy of Master Venzoff's help. Gruer, sit down. Jerome was the calmest of all present. Perhaps it was precisely because of this clarity that Loki was willing to hand over the reins of power to him upon his departure. The French army is no weak mercenary garrison in the Cloud Province. Katya led the Winged Guards in battle against them on the Yellowstone Plateau a few days ago. She can explain to you the formidable strength of the French regular army. Katya, standing in the corner, crossed her shoulders, her expression grave. A wild child abducted from Slavic territory by Loki, Katya had been influenced by his presence and had become a garrison captain, even wilder than a Viking. In the valley, she dared rob the storm monks who came to gather herbs in the wild mountains. Now in the English Isles, there was no one she wouldn't rob. Almost anyone without a pass would be mercilessly attacked by the Winged Guards. The smugglers so rampant in the English Isles were non-existent in Normandy. They're very strong, Katya said gravely. Of the 50 Golden Scale Guards who crossed the border into the Yellowstone Plateau, at least 20 belonged to the Holy Bishop or the chosen ones of the Zoroastrianism, and 3 or 4 more, probably even more secretive cultists of the evil god. To take down those 50, I sacrificed nearly 10 Winged Guards. And that's after we had already occupied advantageous terrain and launched a surprise attack from above. My apologies, Master Alfred. My plan was difficult and scared you. Alfred nodded and said nothing. He had already thanked both God King Odin and Holy Lord Christ for making this hellish escape possible. He couldn't ask for more. That's only 50 men. My mentor, the Saint Yusubi, once told me that the Golden Scale Guard stationed in Paris numbered a full 10,000. Jerome pushed Alfred back onto the bed. These 10,000 are just the garrison for Paris alone. The Duchy of France has 21 provinces, and the Duke of each province could easily provide 7,000 to 8,000 troops. If they were willing to hire Visigothic mercenaries from our neighboring kingdom, or the Roaring Knights of the Alva Khanate, they could easily raise an army of 300,000, and we might not even be able to provide 10,000 right now. How should we fight this war? Jerome calmly pointed out the problem that Normandy was about to face. It was a simple number, but it weighed like a mountain, weighing down everyone's heads. After a brief silence, Sartre's steady voice was the first to rise. We must fight, because if we don't, we'll all slowly die. Sartre had grown up with Loki, and through subtle influence, his way of thinking was quite similar to Loki's. The French have already begun their commercial sanctions against the 7 kingdoms of England. I wonder what has become of the cities under your rule? Take my ironwood fortress, for example. The price of glass has recently increased 8-fold. The prices of woolen cloth, papyrus, candles, dyes, spices, and all these imported daily necessities have all seen a significant increase. We Vikings are used to hardship. Without these luxuries, we can still survive in the mountains, but what about the other English people in the 7 kingdoms? They're not just a few thousand, but over 1 million. Although they're unarmed, a single spit from each of them is enough to drown us. If this stalemate continues, I guarantee that within 2 years, we'll be fleeing back to Scandinavia in disgrace. But what about after we return? Sartre stopped short. He knew that everyone present was a vassal with castles and fiefdoms. They understood this clearly. There was no going back. The Vikings now had a new king. Merindin had already divided all the lands among her newly appointed nobles. If they lost their lands in England, they would be left in a state of panic. There was no way they would be taken seriously. We shall die standing, but not on our knees, Gulal roared. Duke Loki has done everything he could for us. He was even willing to walk alone to Paris to withstand the provocations of the French lords for us all. As long as he has a breath left, we cannot abandon him. I must make this clear to you all. He looked around, and everyone nodded in silence. To everyone present, Loki's importance was self-evident. I suggest that from now on, all vassals return to their fiefdoms and prepare their armies. Sartre pulled over a map of Normandy and nailed it to the wall of the conference room. If we can gather 10,000 people, we will use them to fight the French. If we can gather 5,000 people, we will use them to advance on Paris. Everything we have was given by Duke Loki. Even if we ascend to Valhalla together, we will not be alone on this journey. Chapter 427 Night Talk. Every Viking was filled with righteous indignation, their eyes blazing with fire. To the English, they had just waged a war and rested for less than a winter. However, the Viking mind never saw things that way. To them, they hadn't seen a proper battle in over 7 months. During these long months, they had eaten lavishly, slept on soft woolen beds, and feasted on mountains of seasoned steaks. They had access to all kinds of liquor, and no more women to plunder. This seemingly paradise felt comfortable for a week, perhaps even tolerable for a month. But after 7 long months, with the arrival of summer, the air returned to a scorching heat. Almost everyone missed the days of wielding axes and waging bloody battles. After spending time with these wild warriors, Alfred knew they simply couldn't resist a spectacular death. Many powerful warriors even yearned for a death that would go down in history. Only in death could they reunite with their undead brothers in Valhalla. The Duke and vassal in the conference room immediately began poring over the map to plot their rendezvous. Even the usually calm Jerome, after calculating the pros and cons, joined in the discussion. This wasn't the first time the group from Frostwater Village had faced desperate odds. The defense of Frostwater Village 3 years ago, the English invasion 2 years prior. Each time, they'd been pushed to the brink, forced to fight with their last legs. And each time, they'd successfully forged a path of survival with their axes. In their eyes, it was just another brilliant performance for the god King Odin. In contrast to the rest of the crowd, filled with fervor and fighting spirit, Alfred, standing in the corner, remained unwavering and composed. Having fled from France and experienced countless life and death battles with a golden scale guard, he alone knew the true strength of the French guards. Not only were they well equipped with sophisticated armor and weapons, but they also possessed a large number of Dragon Knights and Pegasus Knights. At least 1/3 of the soldiers were chosen ones, and all the non-commissioned officers above the rank of Centurion were mid to high sequence chosen ones. Not to mention the dozens of East Continent sword cultivators within Paris who slaughtered with ease. In pure combat prowess, they were not even on the same level as the English army of last summer. Their combat prowess was no less than that of the Vikings, yet their numbers far outnumbered them. This was an insurmountable gap. Without the presence of great tanks or immortals or true gods, most medieval wars became a matter of numbers. After all, both armies engaged in bloody hand-to-hand combat, armed with swords and shields. In such battles, the superior force inevitably prevailed. The French duchy's army was at least 30 times larger than the Normans. If they were willing to pay for the services of the Visigothic pirates and the roaring knights of the Avar Khanate, it could be 50 or even 70 times larger. Although Alfred didn't want to deny it, he truly wanted to tell them that such resistance was completely pointless, let alone an attack on France itself. With the small army Normandy could muster, it was doubtful they could even cross Wessex. The proud French would never allow war to spread to their own territory. Every building and every city they built utilized the finest construction techniques of the Western continent. If they could keep the enemy at bay, they would surely dispatch a large army to intercept the Vikings in Wessex, for Wessex had no power to offer any opposition. In the evening, as everyone concluded their day's meetings and departed for their own territories, Alfred knocked on Jerome's door. "Master, we need to win this war, not let these warriors we've painstakingly trained die in vain." Facing the warm hearth, Alfred voiced his concerns. Of all Loki's vassals, only Master Jerome, a seasoned figure, could clearly understand his meaning. "We need reinforcements, large numbers. Only by evenly balancing our numbers can we have a chance of winning this battle." Jerome's eyes blazed, knowing exactly what Alfred meant. But after a long moment of reflection, he finally shook his head firmly. "Your Highness, your way of thinking is related to your upbringing, but with all due respect, you're only 15. You don't know the people of this land well enough to crush a weaker enemy with superior military strength." Everyone would come. On the one hand, they want a share of the victor's wine, on the other, they gain a powerful ally. Adding icing on the cake is something everyone wants. But no one is willing to offer timely assistance. No nation operating in the Western continent is immune to trade. And as long as there's import and export trade, the Duchy of France is a formidable obstacle. To offend them is like throwing gold coins into the ocean. In this situation, we must be prepared to fight alone. We must deny ourselves the hope of possible reinforcements first and foremost. Never place your life on the mercy of others. It's a dangerous act. Second, when faced with despair, hope is a very dangerous emotion. In terms of life experience, Jerome was no less experienced than Alfred. Alfred had studied in Constantinople as a child, while Jerome, accompanied by his mentor, had traveled extensively. From commoners to nobles, he was familiar with most of the land's inhabitants and understood their ways of thinking. Alfred was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. By the age of 15, he had already tasted the finest delicacies and slept with the most beautiful women in the Western continent. As for wealth and status, he was already at the top of the world. For him, only one adventurous adventure could satisfy his needs. However, for the other princes and nobles of the Western continent, life was not a one-man feeds the whole family kind of life. Most had to consider their descendants, their vassals, and the tens of thousands of people within their kingdoms. They could not afford any risks. No allies would be willing to aid the Normans at this moment. Sending out alliances fosters hope. But after a few days, news of rejection after rejection returns. When hope repeatedly turns to disappointment, negative emotions accumulate. This is a very dangerous situation in a major war. Every victory of the weak over the strong in history stems from a decisive battle. When Leonidas led his 300 warriors to the pass of Thermopylae, he knew no reinforcements would arrive. Each man fought to the death, ultimately winning the battle. A classic counterexample is the Battle of Talas, which took place 50 years earlier. He led 20,000 tank troops and was surrounded by 200,000 Arabs. He longed for reinforcements, but they never arrived. We can only fight with the resources we have. Because that's how we've always fought. Jerome displayed a stubbornness typical of a Catholic. On the one hand, he knew no one would come to his aid. On the other, the various battles he had fought over the past 3 years had given him confidence in the Vikings. In the defense of Hanshu village 3 years ago, the entire village of 30 soldiers faced off against 500 Viking shield axemen. I thought I would die on that snowy night, but we won. 2 years ago, when the empty Hanshu village was landed by Duke Bernard's private army and the English navy at the same time, and when that powerful East Continent swordsman appeared in the village, I thought we were doomed, but at the same time, we survived. If the gods in heaven are really watching us, everything that happened today is just another massacre. It's no big deal. Chapter 428 Father and Son Meeting, Part 1. In the spacious study at Southampton Palace, Egbert buried himself in books. Every afternoon, from 1 o'clock to 3 p.m., he unwaveringly devoted himself to reading. During these 2 hours, he would abandon all official duties and confine himself to his study, meticulously poring over the scholarship of his predecessors. He held a copy of Armaments of War. The book's age was evident, the animal sinews binding the pages were on the verge of breaking, and the fragile pages could not even be turned by hand, requiring only a thin, light jade ruler. Observing the ingenious instruments depicted on the pages, He marveled at the exquisite mechanical craftsmanship of the ancient Greeks, thousands of years earlier. Back then, they could even equip humans with wooden, bird-like wings, allowing them to briefly glide through the air. Sadly, all of this had now vanished into the dust of history with the fall of ancient Greece. Wessex's daily duties were demanding. 1. To read, Egbert had to sacrifice his usual nap time. However, a man nearly 40 years old, after a full lunch, inevitably felt sleepy. A wave of sleepiness washed over him, and he yawned, gently covering his mouth with the back of his hand. Warm afternoon sunlight streamed into the spacious study, illuminating the ancient scrolls within. Everything seemed so peaceful, so harmonious. He caressed the tiny specks of dust in the air, their shadows shone by the light. All the farces of the world are but like dancing dust in the eyes of the scorching sun. Today, Egbert found it difficult to concentrate. Normally, at this time, Iphitus would press his fingers to his temple, gently stimulating his head with blood-colored psychic energy. He instinctively turned his head, glancing at the empty doorway, and was reminded once again that Iphitus had been dead for a long time. She had perished at the hands of the Vikings and the Bakenbush. These invaders, swarming from the sea, had killed his queen and taken his eldest son. He naturally harbored hatred for these northerners. But to be fair, they had shown him mercy by not killing him outright after capturing him on the battlefield. The mutual reciprocity between kings is far more important than that between commoners. He had been feeling his right eye twitching for the past few days. It all stemmed from the sudden arrival of thousands of Golden Scale Guards in Wessex. They were the central army stationed in Paris, the direct troops of the Plantagenet family. Normally, they would never leave Paris. Yet, this time, they crossed the English Channel and entered Wessex under the guise of capturing Vikings. This made Egbert wonder if his missing son had perished on French soil. Knock, knock, knock. 3 rhythmic knocks echoed at the door, and Egbert frowned again. Everyone in the palace knew not to disturb him during his lunchtime study. A knock at the door was a sign of something significant happening in the city. Carefully setting down the fragile scroll in his hand, he rose to open the door. Unexpectedly, he was met with the face of his eldest son. "Father, I'm back." Seeing his eldest son, after a year's absence, he said nothing, but breathed a sigh of relief. The Red Queen was dead, and he could no longer bear the loss of another loved one. Despite handing Alfred over to the Vikings, Egbert never relaxed his watch over him. Griffin-mounted Sky Knights constantly circled overhead. And it's safe to say that without the protection of these soaring bodyguards, Alfred would have never escaped the Cloud Province safely. Even when he followed Loki into France, the Sky Knights, accompanied by a squadron of Moas, followed him everywhere. Unfortunately, he was rescued by the Firebringers outside Versailles Castle. The knights lost their target and were forced to return before the vast army of Golden Scale Guards arrived. From that day on, Egbert prayed daily to the gods for his eldest son's safe return. The gods finally favored him once again. So the rumors are true. This Duke Loki has caused a terrible disaster and has since been controlled by the Plantagenet family. The two had only spoken for 10 minutes when Egbert, unable to control himself, stood up and paced back and forth. He needed to quickly process the information he had gathered. Alfred continued to recount his experiences on this trip. When the story surfaced that the Plantagenets were actually the leaders of the Illuminati, even the calm and collected Egbert couldn't help but palpate. Did this news come from the fire spreaders? Yes, and it comes from the mouth of a fire thief hiding in Versailles. Versailles fire thief. It seems to be true. So, since the time of your great-grandfather, Cadwalla, we've been dealing with a group of old lizards in human skin. No, my lord, it's likely much earlier, Alfred corrected. According to the fire thief, they've been monitoring the palace near Paris since the Carolingian dynasty came to power. They've learned that from the time of Charlemagne Carolingian until now, the interim ruler of the Duchy of France has always been Mewtwo, the king of Earthsea. He's prepared numerous clones, stripped of most of their spiritual consciousness. While they can normally leave the palace and meet others, most of them appear dull and sluggish. As a result, successive members of the French royal family rarely venture out, and their clansmen never marry into other nations. The sole purpose of these soul boxes is to familiarize vassals and commoners with their faces while they were young. Once they reach adulthood, they're killed and made into human skins, allowing the old lizard to continue his rule. Egbert nodded, his conviction growing stronger in the intelligence his eldest son had risked his life to uncover. Nearly 100 years ago, during the reign of Cadwalla, the great king of Wessex, He had repeatedly expressed his desire to marry into the newly ascended Plantagenet family. But the Plantagenets repeatedly declined. Cadwalla had once attributed this unusual behavior to the pride of the French royal family, but he had never expected the true reason to be this. Your Highness, the Viking vassals ruling Normandy have all been mobilized. They are about to invade France, vowing to wrest Duke Loki from the clutches of the Illuminati. I'd like to ask if we should seize this opportunity to escape the prison of the French Chamber of Commerce. For a moment, Egbert did not answer. He stood up with a solemn expression, then paced back and forth in his study for a long time. As long as war broke out between Normandy and France, Egbert would face significant losses, regardless of whether Wessex joined the fray or not. Geographically, Wessex was like a piece of roast meat sandwiched between two slices of bread, wedged between the Duchy of France and the Normandy region. The shrewd French would never bring the war to their own territory. They would undoubtedly dispatch troops to Wessex and crush the Vikings within the English Isles before they could reach the English Channel. With Normandy's mere 10,000 soldiers, they wouldn't even deploy the scale guard stationed in Paris. The one who came to initiate the war was most likely a belligerent vassal. His prize would be the future ownership of the two Normandy provinces. Egbert's knowledge of the Duchy of France indicated that a single vassal was enough to counter their entire army. And the Duchy of France had 21 provinces of similar size. Chapter 429 Father and Son Meeting, Part 2. The Vikings didn't understand France's might, but that didn't mean Egbert didn't. He mingled closely with these proud and sophisticated nobles, and he was well aware of their power and wealth. The French dukes already held the best lands in the western continent. They simply looked down upon the relatively barren territories of other nations. If they desired war, the entire private armies of all 21 dukes, plus 300 dragons, would take to the skies. Even the Byzantine Empire, heir to the Roman throne, might not be able to withstand such an onslaught. Egbert had once questioned the French duchy's conservative nature, but now, knowing that the Illuminati was behind it, everything seemed to connect. The entire Grand Palais in Paris contained only one living person. Controlling 21 provinces was the limit for a state like this. The suzerain certainly lacked the capital for expansion. Yet, they remained powerful. Over a century ago, when the Arab Empire repeatedly triumphed over the Byzantines, they considered invading France. However, their failure immediately led them to abandon the idea. Such a powerful nation, when faced with the Vikings, was like an elephant facing an ant. Meanwhile, the situation in Wessex was not optimistic. During the Viking invasion last summer, the kingdom's elite troops were decimated by the combined forces of Viking and Slavic forces at Stoneham. The inhabitants of Wessex were completely different from the Vikings, who took up arms from childhood. The English were not born into a life of combat. They attended church schools and returned home to farm, raise livestock, or engage in commerce. It took at least 2 years of continuous combat training to turn a farmer into a qualified soldier. To train a chosen one required even greater resources and even longer training. And only 8 months had passed since that bloody war. Even if Egbert had wanted to join the fight, he lacked a significant force. He once commanded 10 dragon riders. Now, some had died in battle, others had defected. Even the Dragon Mountains, where dragons were raised, were plundered by Loki, leaving behind all the dragon-tongued scholars capable of training them. As for military strength, it was pitifully low. Within the 6 provinces, only a few dukes still commanded a small number of private armies. Unless the French army reached their doorstep, it would be completely unrealistic for them to deploy these last remaining private armies. At this point, the entirety of Wessex had only a little over 10,000 professional soldiers, and the vast majority of these had only just laid down their hose the previous winter. Alfred was Egbert's eldest son, so he hadn't concealed anything from him. The kingdom's situation was clearly laid out before him. With such limited resources, it was certainly not enough to challenge the French. Even if they sent 1 or 2 dukes and their private armies, they might not be able to withstand the onslaught. We've lived together since childhood, you know what goes through my mind. Seeing his eldest son running around for the Vikings, Egbert expressed understanding rather than resentment. The relationship between enemies and friends between countries is ever-changing. When a more powerful enemy appears, sworn enemies from half a year ago can immediately form an alliance again. Now we know that the mastermind behind the rule of France is the Illuminati. If I have the chance, I will definitely find a way to get rid of their control. But my son, please forgive me for being frank, now is not a good time. All I can do now is probably to refuse to join the French army on the grounds of no army. You also know that these masters will definitely let us, their allies who can be manipulated at will, serve as cannon fodder and rush to the front." Alfred also nodded. The real situation in Wessex was indeed worse than he imagined. But one possibility is possible, that's to kick the can down the road. If a mysterious force were to descend from the sky and crush the French army head-on, forcing them to flee like a tidal wave, I believe a vast number of people would spontaneously join the war. Not just our own country, but the 7 kingdoms of England, including the 74 free cities of the Visigothic region, Lombardy, and Bavaria, all the ordinary people living under French commercial sanctions. Although these people are not experts in wielding swords, their combined number is at least 5 million. They live within the yoke of the Duchy of France, oppressed by these powerful merchants. They harbor fear and resentment, yet they are powerless to do anything. If the tide turns, even a glimmer of victory, these insignificant vultures and hyenas will flock to the front. Although they may not be powerful individually, their combined numbers will ultimately produce a transformational change. On the one hand, they could overturn the mountains that weighed on them day after day, year after year. On the other, they could storm prosperous cities and plunder at will. Hundreds of them, built of gold bricks. Such a temptation was irresistible. For in their eyes, they were merely reclaiming what had been stolen from them. Pulling out a map, after a brief silence, Egbert continued, "My son, if I were you, I wouldn't be the first to seek me out as an ally. That would be meaningless." He extended his slender fingers, slowly moving them across the map, finally landing on the Slavic territory on the eastern coast of the Baltic Sea. "I would immediately depart from Murmansk. For it is these northerners who can truly change the tide of war." Egbert's vision was incredibly broad, and the moment he spoke, Alfred immediately grasped his meaning. Normandy and Wessex had just experienced a major war, and there was indeed no one left to use. Looking at all the nearby allies, the only one who maintained a strong military force from beginning to end was the Slavic king Bakenbush of Murmansk province. During the joint Slavic-English invasion 2 years ago, Bakenbush had infiltrated the Dragon's Breath Plateau with only 100 men. His subsequent wartime resources consisted entirely of Slavic slaves liberated from the Viking provinces. Last year, he crossed the sea to reinforce Loki. Although Egbert didn't know why he came, Bakenbush brought only 5,000 troops. This number was insignificant for the Slavic people, who were practically universal warriors. Provinces like Murmansk, Warsaw, and Kuliesh still had a large number of Slavic warriors. But, don't be happy too soon. Just 8 months ago, Loki was able to defeat our army thanks to the sudden participation of Bakenbush. In less than a year, you are going to ask others to risk their lives for you again. I don't think this journey will be as smooth as you imagined. How to really solve the subsequent troubles depends on you. Everyone is born to face their own hardships. 20 years ago, my hardship was how I survived the military coup launched by King Elberud of Kent. Relying on the Red Queen, I succeeded, and everything you are facing now is also a test from the Holy Lord Christ. Only by going through trials can we grow. I hope you can be like me and become the savior of Wessex again." Chapter 430, Muspelheim, the Land of Fire. After bidding farewell to his biological father, Alfred briefly met with his mother, the Queen, and his younger siblings, then headed for the docks that afternoon. At the dock, Egbert had prepared a 2-masted clipper for him. Aboard the clipper were the Sky Knight Thukert, his 10 Moa knights, 20 sailors, and 12 personal guards ready for any situation. He did not stop his eldest son from seeking allies for the Vikings, but rather, he secretly supported them in his own way. When it came to governing a country, his vision was far more far-sighted than Jerome's. In Egbert's eyes, the Vikings, who had temporarily occupied 2 provinces, were not a significant threat to the kingdom. They were merely a group of survivors seeking to gain land and prosper. But the Duchy of France was completely different. They had everything they needed, yet they still greedily exploited all the surrounding nations. If these 2 groups were compared to wild beasts, the Vikings were merely hungry wolves driven to prey. The French, however, were monsters who had long since eaten their fill and reveled in slaughter. This kind of enemy was a formidable threat. This was especially true now that he had learned that the Plantagenets were actually Mewtwo, the Lord of Earthsea from the Illuminati, in disguise. This heightened his sense of peril. Humanity could be ruled by humans, even succumbing to new gods born from their own hordes. But he must not be led around by these lizard monsters. Therefore, he gave Alfred every assistance he needed. If he could truly find allies, if these Vikings could truly perform another miracle and defeat the French army head-on, if only there was a glimmer of hope for overthrowing tyranny, Egbert would be willing to risk his life and fight the French duchy to the death. But he also knew that the journey would not be as smooth as he had imagined. Sure enough, 7 days later, upon setting foot on Murmansk soil, Alfred encountered his first challenge. He was greeted by Oleg, who was temporarily seated in the large tent. He once again took control of the country. Bakambush hadn't emerged since entering Asgard last winter. Alfred and Bakambush were old friends, and he knew exactly where his master might be hiding. At the end of the tent, he saw the Asgard portal. All was open. The Slavs hadn't concealed anything. The Asgard portal lay openly within Bakambush's tent, accessible to anyone. For in this land, not even the holy bishop had ever appeared, let alone the Zoroastrians. The Murmansk province lacked the necessary soil for the Zoroastrians to establish a firelink shrine. The firelink gang relied on selling intelligence to survive. But in this remote, bitterly cold land, not even castles, not even houses, were common. Most Slavs, even the Slavic king, lived in tents year-round. Even if a fire priest were willing to deign to journey to this desolate icy hell, they wouldn't have a single basement or hidden house to hide in. As for the holy bishop, the untamed Slavs never took these white-robed monks seriously, perhaps due largely to their long-standing anti-civilization sentiment. Slavs harbor no desire for literacy and completely reject order and structure. They resemble beasts more than humans. There's no commerce here either, for Bakambush is a man who tolerates no injustice. 2 springs ago, simply because he'd been deceived by the prophet Himas, he could storm into a Southampton church and crush his head in public. For merchants driven by profit, the Slavic region is a veritable desolate place. Never mind the possibility of traversing the icy tundra, devoid of roads or coordinates. Even if they managed to reach Murmansk, any business with the Slavs would be a desperate struggle. The deception and calculations that merchants rely on simply couldn't be practiced here. The brutal and untamed Slavs had no concept of buy and sell or pay and pay. If they thought they were being cheated, a pair of giant hands would grab their heads in the next second. Block out Zoroastrianism and holy bishops, and then persuade all merchants to leave. The Slavs were a truly isolated place. With no information coming in or out, they had no need to hide the Asgard portal. The Slav supervision of the portal was so lax that Alfred strode through without a single question. The portal, like an ordinary residential door, was almost always open to the Slavs. Upon entering the platform leading to the 7 divine realms, a large amount of food and daily necessities were piled up. There were even several old, mottled dogs chained there. Seeing Alfred enter, they stood up in alarm, but upon smelling that familiar scent, they crouched down again. This was the sole guard of the Asgard portal. Alfred knew where Bakambush was. The other buttons on the elevator were pristine, but the one leading to Muspelheim, the land of fire, was covered in dust, mud, and even blood stains. Months ago, upon leaving Asgard, the two had explored a significant portion of the land of fire. He commanded the chosen ones of the Eagle Path at the Temple of Hakaran to possess high-flying birds and chart this fiery hell from above. The 7 realms were a rare treasure Bakambush had finally discovered. Unlike the Vikings, who entered solely to obtain potions, Bakambush relished the process of exploration and the thrill of battle. He wanted to carefully explore each level, traverse every inch of the land, and defeat every monster. The elevator began to operate, and a vast starry sky began to appear before his eyes. As he journeyed through the stars, Alfred opened his eyes as darkness washed over him. All he saw was a dark red world. The air was thick with a faint scent of burning flames. A row of simple tents stood not far from the entrance. Many wounded or exhausted Slavic warriors were sleeping in the tents. He grabbed the 2 Slavic servants who were in charge of the cooking and briefly inquired about Bakambush's direction. Alfred plunged headfirst into this crimson, burning hell. Beneath his feet lay the scorching, dark red earth. Nearby, a river of flames swirled. The water flowed like a potent liquor. When it touched the scorching rocks on the banks, the entire river erupted in flames. From time to time, flying fish would burst from the water, darting through the air. This was a world utterly alien to the human world. Alfred didn't express much surprise. After all, just a few months earlier, he had battled here with Bakambush for 2 months. In those 2 months, he had become accustomed to this desolate place. He knew where Bakambush was. Sure enough, he was challenging the towering giant wielding a flaming sword. Chapter 431, Fire Giant Surtur. The ultimate monster roaming the Fireland, Muspelheim, is called Surtur. A colossal giant clad in pitch black, he wields a flaming giant sword. Nearly 100 meters tall, he trudged across the vast expanse of Muspelheim with heavy steps. He has no purpose, no clear direction. He mechanically drags his 10-meter-long flaming giant sword, wandering aimlessly and haphazardly. The blade, formed from pure flame, carves the earth, sometimes forming ravines, sometimes rivers. Sometimes, the sword plunges deep into the earth, awakening ancient creatures lurking beneath the dark red soil. Whenever this happens, the pitch-black fire giant briefly opens his eyes and wields his great sword to slay the outsiders. These aliens are the outer gods lurking in the Fireland. In the ancient records of the Viking ancestors, this giant roaming the Fireland is a formidable presence among the 7 divine realms. It is rumored that he existed in the dark red chaos before the 7 divine realms were created. No one knows his exact origins, nor how many tens of thousands of years he lived. The ancient sagas, both prose and verse, compiled by the Vikings, contain accounts of Surtur. These details the Ragnarok, twilight of the gods, in Asgard. Thousands of years ago, Surtur was not the only fire giant. He commanded a force of equal strength, the Eldjnir. When the frost giants, Hrimurser, were defeated by the Vikings and fled into Asgard, the fire giants, sharing their common ancestry, naturally allied themselves with them. Surtur decided that rather than immediately attacking the human world, it would be better to conquer Asgard and establish a foothold among the 7 divine realms. The frost giant king, Loki, was still mired in the terror of Olaf the Bloody Conqueror, and the two struck up a partnership. Later, they sought out the mountain giants, Bergrisr, who had been defeated and driven from Vanaheim by the Vanir. Mountain giants were known for their brutal natures, and in later Viking language, the term berserker evolved into a specific term for berserkers. The giant army's attack on Asgard, known as the Doomsday War, is known in Viking sagas as Twilight of the Gods. Legend has it that in the early stages of the war, the hero of the giant army was none other than Surtur. He charged at the forefront, wielding a flaming greatsword, and with one blow, he pierced Hymir, the guardian of the Rainbow Bridge, preventing him from closing the portal into Asgard. As the giants poured into Asgard, he single-handedly withstood the attack of Frey. He then engaged in a fierce battle for days, ultimately severing the Vanir's head with a single blow. However, he himself was severely wounded. The frost giant king Loki and the mountain giant king Muspel clashed and died. As the giant army neared defeat, he threw his flaming greatsword. This sword ignited the world tree, causing a long fire that spread across the 7 realms. Later generations called the fire that ended Ragnarok the Surtur's flame, Surtology. Based on the Storm Acolytes' research into ancient texts, they believe that after the frost giants retreated from the human world to Asgard, a group of Viking ancestors followed them into the divine realm, joining the magnificent war known as Ragnarok. It might be easy to invent a story, but conjuring up a story from different locations that connects to form a universe, with every detail fitting seamlessly, is like interrogating several prisoners in isolation. If their statements are consistent, then their claims must be true. Ragnarok must have been a brutal war between the ancient gods. As Bakambush's power grew, so did his own. He first defeated the gatekeeper in the Viking Holy Mountain and was granted the power of thunder by the god King Odin. Then, he defeated the Red Queen Ifritas in a near massacre outside the Green Valley. After the war ended and he entered Asgard, he delved into the Firelands, slaying everything from minions to monsters, even the outer gods hiding within the continent. Finally, he set his sights on the Fireland's ultimate monster, the fire giant Surtur. Surtur was unlike any other common warrior he had ever encountered. To confront him, Bakambush was thoroughly prepared. He mobilized nearly every elite force in the Murmansk province. This would be his first direct confrontation with a legendary god. When Alfred finally discovered the Slavic troops, he saw an army unlike any he had seen before. As the instructors in Valhalla had said, every army is forged through bloody battle. This Slavic army's journey to this point in the Firelands had clearly come at a heavy price. While they could crush the English with their superior physical prowess and combat skills, the Firelands monsters were vastly different in combat power from mortals. The deaths of their comrades had quickly forged their discipline. They were no longer as disorganized as they had been on the English Isles. Before the battle began, everyone tensed up and lined up in perfect formation. Heavy giant footsteps could be heard from the distant canyon, and it was clear that Surtur was slowly approaching their defensive formation. "Let me repeat our battle plan," Bakambush shouted calmly to the Slavic warriors behind him. "The heavily armored mammoths will be at the forefront. Use their tusks and chains to hold down his legs. Then, the greedy wolf pathers and the fisherman pathers will climb onto his body." Through the fighting over the past 2 months, we've learned that this guy's only means of attack is that great sword. As long as we climb onto him, he won't swing that flaming giant sword to cut himself off. The greedy wolf pathers will charge towards his palms on the giant's body. Your mission is to cripple his palms and prevent him from holding the giant sword. Fisherman pathers, your goal is to stand on his shoulders and then use the grappling hook to attack the giant's eyes. If we can pull out his eyeballs like we did last time, as long as we have the eyeballs, we can concoct 3 more bottles of Flame Berserker Sequence 3 potions, get them into the hands of the Viking chick, and we can exchange them for food, medicine, and even manpower. Everyone, get ready, he's coming. The heavy footsteps of the flame giant drew closer and closer. When his pitch-black skin finally emerged from the valley, boom, boom, boom. The mammoth has raised its sharp horns and is charging towards the giant, driven by the knights behind it. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 432, Killing God. Thanks to the First Alliance leader Tian Laohu. The 9-headed Hydra, Princess Hacker, is a primitive deity of the Slavs. These pale, monstrous men living in the barren tundra embrace this beast of unknown origin. This is partly due to the power bestowed upon them by this deity, but also to its formidable hunting skills. Within the Hacker Temple, 5 paths of advancement remain: the giant bear, the greedy wolf, the eagle, the elk, and the mammoth. In ancient times, it was rumored that the toxodon, the snow python, and the frost behemoth were among the creatures Slavic hunters attempted to domesticate. However, with the fall of the previous civilization, these ancient creatures were decimated by the slaughter of their ancestors. In recent centuries, sightings have become virtually non-existent. Mammoths, then, have become the Slavic hunters' most powerful hunting companions. These heavily armored beasts of the frigid snowy plains are vastly different from their southern steppe cousins. They can exceed 8 meters in height and weigh a staggering 20 tons. Furthermore, the mammoths that roam the tundra are true omnivores. From giant monsters and dragon carcasses to shrubs, bark, and animal bones, they devoured everything they encountered to sustain their immense consumption. Their temperaments were far more violent and ferocious than their peers. The mammoth stomped towards the giant. Surtur's aimless wandering was instantly shaken by the sight of the frantic charge. This was Alfred's first close-up observation of this legendary giant. Tens of thousands of years of aimless wandering, coupled with the loss of a magnificent battle years ago, had long since eclipsed the mighty giant depicted in paintings. He was gaunt, frail, and covered in scars. Yet, even so, he was a killer who had survived Ragnarok. Surtur silently gazed at the beasts running towards him. His face impassive, he raised the flaming sword that had been lowered to the ground. The blazing flames reignited, instantly painting half the sky red. Flames coalesced on the sword, tens of meters long. Just before swinging over the mammoth's head, a bolt of lightning soared into the air amidst the billowing smoke, slamming down onto the giant sword in midair with a thud. It was none other than Bakambush, transformed into lightning. Brothers, I've neutralized his first wave of attacks. This thing moves and turns very slowly. Greedy wolf and fisherman passerby, you may begin your climb. Clutching the flaming giant sword in both hands, Bakambush barked orders from midair. His deep voice echoed through the troops on the ground, and the ready men immediately began to carry out his orders. The chosen ones, hidden on the mammoth's back, leaped onto the giant's knees. Using the hooks of their palms and soles, they desperately scrambled up the giant's dark skin. Just then, the second wave of flaming sword attacks arrived. Surtur stood nearly 100 meters tall, and his greatsword, Surtur's blaze, was 60 or 70 meters long. Simply relying on bare hands to stay on the giant sword was unrealistic. Even someone as powerful as Bakambush could only temporarily evade it. The burden of withstanding the second blow fell to the mountain giant Pather. Led by Bakambush, the Slavs had penetrated deep into the various worlds of the 7 divine realms. Despite suffering heavy casualties, they had also harvested a vast supply of extraordinary materials. Creating potions never required much technical skill. Simple mixing and stirring was all that was needed. As a result, the Slavs had accumulated a vast potion base. Joining the Slavic king's hunting party, these two Viking warriors served as primary shields. Both were sequence 3, Lord of the Earth, under the mountain giant path, facing the incoming flaming giant sword. The two mortals suddenly surged to 20 meters in height, using their massive rock shields to resist a blow. After withstanding Surtur's second blow, both were sent flying by the immense force, but at least they protected the mammoth behind them. The fisherman Pather and the greedy wolf Pather, clambering separately from the giant's body, had already reached his waist. No. That's a bit slow, push harder, faster. Bakumbush, having landed, joined the climb. Still in his giant white bear form, he swiftly climbed the giant's legs, using both hands and feet. A beast warrior nearly 3 meters tall would be considered a giant in the human world, but on Surtur, he looked as small as an insignificant dent. Climbing 100 meters of vertical height wasn't a difficult task for these powerful chosen ones. But if this person was constantly swaying from side to side, it was a real struggle. At least half of the climbers had lost their grip and fallen. As the survivors neared his chest, he plunged his flaming sword into the soil. Two massive hands were already striking at his chest. Raven Path and Eagle Path, come out. A dark shadow suddenly appeared in the swirling red mist of the sky. It was a flock of ravens soaring through the air. The saga book records 13 paths of advancement, along with corresponding potions for each sequence level. The most mysterious of these, requiring the most complex ingredients, is the Raven Path. Given Bakumbush's near-complete exploration of the 7 divine realms, his potions could only reach sequence 4, Storm Raven. Many ingredients for sequence 3 potions remain unknown. However, this does not diminish the power of the Storm Raven. A flock of ravens, emerging from the dark red smoke, quickly attached themselves to Surtur's eyes. The dark, chaotic flock blinded his fiery red vision. Among them, several ferocious hawks, sharp claws bared, swooped down. Surtur's eyes were one of his few weaknesses. When the flock attacked, it was too late to block it with his arms. He could only close his eyelids and wave his arms around. The sudden gust of wind scattered the flock, and in that brief moment, the climbers had already passed over the giant's chest and were about to reach his shoulders. In the more than 10 battles they've fought against Surtur, this is the farthest they've advanced. Victory seems imminent. I still urge readers to spend wisely. Gentlemen with spare cash, please give me 100 points as a token of appreciation. When I say I'm poor, I don't mean I can't afford to eat or wear clothes. I still want you to save your money and enjoy more drinking and dating while you're young. Don't let your 30s be filled with regrets. Chapter 433 Killing God, 2. The human shoulder is closest to the head. Once atop the shoulder, it provides a platform from which to launch an attack. Figuring out how to get the fisherman passengers onto the giant's shoulders consumed a significant portion of Bakumbush's brain power. Initially, he faced the giant alone and was utterly defeated. Then, he summoned his vassals to Asgard, and finally, he began to humble himself and seek cooperation with the Vikings. To defeat Surtur, Bakumbush dedicated himself to an unprecedented level of focus. His first small goal was to get the fisherman passengers to stand on the giant's shoulders. So, when the 2 surviving werewolves and 4 fisherman passengers finally climbed onto the giant's shoulders, even the rugged Bakumbush felt a wave of emotion. Victory was just around the corner. The fisherman passengers are a unique group within the 13th sequence of Valhalla. Judging by the saga book, where the lizardmen copied the potion recipe, when the powerless Vikings rediscovered the god King Odin, the Aesir truly accepted them as subjects. He not only passed down the paths of berserkers, valkyries, and giants, designed for combat, but upon discovering Scandinavia's proximity to the sea, Frey, the god of plenty, bestowed upon the Vikings the sailor's path, enabling them to swim for extended periods and never lose their way. Furthermore, fearing they would starve, Frey also granted them the fisherman's path, allowing them to use hooks to precisely reel in fish from both the surface and the depths of rivers. Odin also bestowed upon them the raven's path, allowing them to see into the past and the future, much like the 2 ravens, Fukian and Misty, who hung on his shoulders. And that wasn't the most outrageous thing. Thor's beautiful wife, Sif, also passed down the siren's path, primarily for entertainment. Those who follow the siren's path possess graceful figures and melodious voices. Fueled by divine power, they can dance with abandon. Even underwater, their sounds carried far by the currents. The siren song possesses no offensive power, but it can precisely convey emotions such as joy, sorrow, lethargy, and confusion. The transmission of this emotion is the foundation of all art. If the potion needed to create the siren's path weren't so rare, and if Viking women weren't generally wild, trafficking women would have been more profitable than selling saber-toothed mercenaries. Finally standing on the giant's shoulders, the fishermen's path slowly unsheathed their fishing rods. They waited for Surtur to open his eyes. The birds of the human world were nothing more than flies to this giant's eyes. The waving of his giant paws created a fierce wind, and the raven paths and the ravens they drove could no longer approach the giant's eye. They fell from the sky. Just then, the fishermen's paths approached again. Finally, 3 of them stood on the giant's lower lip. They unsheathed the fishing rods they'd been carrying all the way back and unsheathed their crimson stone hooks, each as big as a human head. In the land of fire, a towering volcano reached the clouds. At its summit lay a surging, tranquil lake, flowing not with molten lava but with scorching, molten steel. The Slavic hunters always sacrificed their lives to reach the summit of the mountain. At the lake's summit, they used hanging iron buckets to draw molten steel from the surface, then immediately cooled it and fashioned it into weapons. Weapons forged from this molten iron, infused with psychic energy, would instantly turn red-hot like branding iron. The fishermen needed this instantaneous heat. It was clear this wasn't the first time the Slavic army had encircled Surtur. They were familiar with the giant's anatomy, knowing that beneath his skin lay human flesh. His eyeballs, like those of earth creatures, were organic tissue. When the fiery iron hook pierced the eye, the instantaneous heat evaporated the moisture and solidified the flesh. The fishermen knew this would allow them to use their hooks to remove the giant's eyeball, approximately 1 meter in diameter. With the eyeball destroyed, the battle against the giant was already 90% won. The 3 fishermen stood ready. Over the past 3 months, nearly 2,000 companions had expended immense manpower and resources, costing hundreds of casualties, to finally bring these 3 to this point. They dug their spike soles deep into the giant's lip. Psionic energy infused the steel hooks in their hands, and just as the giant's eyes barely opened, the fiery hooks were already swung precisely into its eyes. To ensure a successful kill, the 3 men didn't attack both eyes simultaneously, but instead combined their strength to sling all 3 hooks simultaneously into the giant's right eye. 2 sequence 7 hook masters and a sequence 5 titter hunter, a total of 3 fiery iron hooks, precisely pierced Surtur's eyeball. Feeling the fiery hooks pierce soft biological tissue, the 3 men leaped. Using their own weight, the 3 Viking warriors pulled Surtur's right eye from its socket. The Viking and Slavic warriors roared with excitement. In stark contrast to them, the seemingly miserable giant stood in stark contrast. He stood there blankly, his expression as frozen as ever. Watching from the sidelines, Bakumbush sensed a strange odor. He imagined the eyeless giant would go mad, like a man-bear in the cold taiga, indiscriminately attacking anyone nearby. If that were to happen, they could gradually lure the giant into their preset trap. Once the giant fell into the trap, the rest would be effortless. But now, the eyeless giant became as still as a statue. This was completely beyond his imagination. For a moment, Bakumbush was unsure what to do next. Should he immediately reclaim his hard-earned eye? Or should he take advantage of the giant's paralysis and climb back up to pluck out the other eye? In a strange land, any impulsive decision could lead to total ruin. Surtur was the most powerful enemy he had faced since entering the divine realm. He cautiously circled around him, their gazes locked in silence. 3 minutes passed, then 5. Suddenly, a flame erupted from one of the giant's pitch-black eye sockets. Then, the flame surged forth, flowing like a stream of scorching lava down the giant's body. Wherever the flames passed, the once dark, hardened skin, like solidified molten lava, fell away, revealing a fiery crimson form. Bakumbush's eyes widened. God King Odin. Do you see that? That fiery crimson skin, and those eyes burning with fire, this guy actually has a second form. Haha. I told you, this legendary enemy won't be easily defeated. Brothers, grab your weapons. Brace yourselves. I want to see just how powerful his second form is. What new tricks can he pull off? From beginning to end, Bakumbush, completely absorbed in the battlefield, hadn't noticed Alfred's appearance. This scene, however, instantly made Alfred feel as if the scorching fire element in the air had found its master. The scorching, dry air burned his lungs with every breath. Amidst the crimson smoke and dust, Surtur seized his flaming greatsword. A war between mortals and gods had begun once again. Chapter 434 The Reign of the Empress, 1. Alfred sighed deeply and silently turned away. Throughout his time knowing the Slavic king, he had displayed a completely careless and indifferent attitude towards everything. He cared nothing for his concubines or children, not even how many concubines or children he had, or which son had the right to inherit the throne. He couldn't even name any of his children. He cared nothing about the kingdom's affairs. He didn't care how many villages existed within the borders, how many vassals he had, whether every household had enough food, or whether the year would be a year of plenty or a drought. He ignored all the work, leaving it all to Oleg. Even battles with other nations were completely devoid of any plan. He simply fought wherever he went. Facing Serdar today was the first time he had seen Bakambush approach a battle so seriously. Even before the battle began, he meticulously planned everyone's actions. Alfred knew that in this state, the Slavic king would never leave Asgard to join him in the mortal realm. Requesting reinforcements was simply a matter of friendship. Helping someone is a matter of righteousness, and not helping is not morally wrong at all. Because Bakambush no longer owes the virgins anything. Last summer, he helped Loki achieve victory against Wessex, and the Asgard portal was the fruit of his victory. After emerging from the Firelands and returning to the cold tent via the elevator, Alfred knew the Normans were in trouble. As expected, when misfortunes come, they never come. Growth is never easy. Alfred didn't linger here for long, because time was no friend to the Normans at that moment. At Versailles, the High Sparrow had already given him a detailed explanation. The soul-searching technique, inherited from ancient Egyptian civilization, is an extremely evil technique. The caster penetrates the target's mind, capable of transforming into various terrifying forms and creating bizarre illusions to torture prisoners. And in terms of the sheer variety of mental tricks, no one could surpass the suzerain, who had survived for 200 million years and experienced 17 cycles of civilization. Alfred had to race against time. If Loki couldn't withstand his soul-searching spell and revealed the hidden location of the Asgard portal before reinforcements arrived, all that awaited the Vikings was a slow decline and death. Leaving Murmansk and returning to the Baltic Sea, Alfred spent half a day reaching the western side of this narrow inland sea. The brig docked at the pier outside Storm's End. He didn't have time to enter the castle, but instead immediately summoned the Griffin Knights and Moa Knights. After a quick meal, they took off. Circumnavigating the entire peninsula by ship was far too slow. Only by soaring over the Skyfall Mountains could they reach the Conqueror's fortress in the shortest possible time. After 8 hours of rapid flight, the exhausted group arrived at the Conqueror's fortress. While the Conqueror's fortress still stood tall and blazing, its inhabitants were vastly different from those of 2 years ago. Having just leaped off the Moa's back, Alfred was astonished to discover the merchants from around the world strolling through the city. A significant number of them were Byzantines, clad in snow-white robes and crowned with delicate curls. As he journeyed deeper into the bazaar, he discovered a constant stream of Slavs, Arabs, Visigoths, French, Turks, and even the proud Tang people, flocking to this remote city. The reason for their visit seemed obvious. It was becoming a burgeoning commercial metropolis on the fringes of the empire. The O'Sullivan family were the first generation of Variag mercenaries to leave Scandinavia centuries ago. After more than a dozen generations of hard work in Byzantium, they now made their living as saber-toothed mercenaries, permanently residing in Constantinople. Marinton never grew up in this environment. Although the O'Sullivans lacked aristocratic titles, their ample funds enabled their children to receive the most orthodox aristocratic education from a young age. Whenever took control of the city, Conqueror's fortress already had a well-functioning commercial infrastructure. While the clientele was limited, it had at least gained a considerable reputation within the merchant family. When Loki handed the 7 Viking provinces to Marindlin, this shrewd businesswoman immediately began implementing drastic renovations according to her vision. The first area to undergo a thorough overhaul was Conqueror's fortress. Entering the city from the gate, Alfred gazed at the desiccated dragon corpse overhead, now fused with a castle, and marveled at the unique landscapes of the wilderness, unseen in bustling cities. The center of human civilization in the western continent was concentrated in the Mediterranean region under the rule of the Byzantine Empire. The closer to the center, the larger the population, the denser the cities, and the more vibrant the light of human civilization. Radiating outward along the Mediterranean, the closer to the edge of the territory, the smaller the population, and the culture tends toward a more primitive and barbaric state. The Black Desert stretching for tens of thousands of miles within the Principality of Ramses, a puppet state supported by the Arab Empire in the northern continent, has yet to be fully mapped. Even a swordsman as formidable as a Tang dynasty warrior would perish in the boundless desert if caught in a black sandstorm mid-flight. In the northern tundra, ruled by the Slavs, one can still witness ferocious creatures from ancient times, such as mammoths, giants, wargs, and toxodonts. As for the castles and cities built by the giants of Scandinavia, ruled by the Vikings, only this region of the world still holds any remnants. This is partly due to the frost giants' exceptional architectural skills. Furthermore, according to the research of scholars in Constantinople, the frost giants were likely the last group of giants to retreat from the human world. They fought tenaciously on this remote continent until the very end, only to be forced to retreat to Asgard. Upon entering the city, the first building they saw was the new Valhalla constructed by Macklendon. Unlike previous Valhalla buildings, which were located in secluded mountains, this massive structure, erected in the heart of the city, was open to all foreign merchants. At the entrance, several storm acolytes in deep blue robes ushered visitors in. Paintings of Viking heroes from the Nibelungenlied stanza line the walls. Intricately carved bronze plaques detail their exploits, weapons, and combat techniques. The next hall showcased the exploits of the saber-toothed mercenaries and offered combat demonstrations. Every half hour, dire wolves or man-bears were released from the massive steel cages, forcing the mercenaries inside to fight them barehanded. In Constantinople, the bloody gladiatorial combat, which cost 5 to 8 silver dinars, was now free for all. Merchants from around the world flocked to the scene, watching with rapt interest. All this preparation served to prepare the benefactors for the final hall. Within this room stood a dozen storm acolytes. Before them lay dozens of potions, poured into exquisite crystal bottles. All the potions crafted from the 13 paths passed down by the god King Odin, including the flame berserkers, hurricane berserkers, mountain giants, sea giants, sirens, and valkyries, were neatly laid out here. Merindin was doing something her predecessors could never have imagined. She was openly selling potions hunted by the Slavs from Asgard. Chapter 435 The Reign of the Empress, 2. He who wears the crown must bear its weight. It was under immense pressure that Merindin took on the crown, symbolizing the queen's status. Very difficult, couldn't even begin to describe the dire nature of her start. As she sat upon the red stone throne of the conqueror's fortress, scepter in hand, she was met with the unanimous, suspicious gazes of her vassals. Suspicion was actually quite gentle. A considerable number of her people already harbored hostility towards the name O'Sullivan. Merindin understood their resentment perfectly. By this time, the vast majority of Vikings had learned that Ivar had colluded with the Illuminati and used the lizardmen to conceal themselves within the Holy Mountain to produce the Potion of Decay. Most Vikings knew that the potion they had purchased at great expense from the Storm Acolytes was actually a death warrant. Once consumed, they would only have a dozen years to live. If it weren't for Loki's men bringing back a large quantity of the marrow-cleansing water of the gods from Jotunheim, these Viking warriors might have rioted immediately. And that was just the first point. Later, he led his saber-toothed mercenaries onto English soil, deliberately splitting his forces with Loki, leaving him alone to face the powerful Wessex. This abandonment of his companions once again inflamed the Duke's wrath. Finally, at the wedding, Loki and Bichambushang ripped off his skin, revealing the old lizard hidden within. With this scene, the entire image cultivated by the O'Sullivan family collapsed. When Morindin ascended the throne, she even cut open her snow-white skin, letting the blood flow, to prove she wasn't a puppet controlled by the lizardmen. In this cold and turbulent world, you are one of my few allies. Only in your hands can I confidently continue my campaigns. I need someone to manage my kingdom. Not Venzov, not Moklash, not just any Viking duke. They are all powerful warriors, and a warrior's destiny is to fight on the battlefield. Only you can govern this country, Loki said to her the day he received the crown. Loki never questioned her knowledge of Ivar's secret collusion with the Illuminati, nor did he inquire whether she was actually a member. Even after all they had been through, he remained unconditionally trusting of Merindin. Their relationship transcended friendship and romance. It was a bond of survival bound together by Darwinian principles. Only through joint effort could they survive. For this reason, after defeating Wessex, Merindin personally secured Elizabeth's marriage for Loki. And after defeating Ivar, Loki handed the kingdom over to her. She inherited a shattered nation. Merindin knew she had reached a historical crossroads. She had to make a change. The Vikings had to accept the changes in their lifestyle brought about by this territorial shift. The Scandinavian land was too cold and barren, and farming was virtually non-existent among the Viking community. Every autumn, they crossed the Baltic Sea to the Slavs, plundering money, food, women, children, and slaves, anything they could find. However, the kingdom now fell into the hands of Marindin. The eastern Slavic states had become staunch allies of the Vikings. This meant that the millennial-long eastward raids would cease, and Slavic slave labor was a thing of the past. Furthermore, the journey westward had become increasingly difficult. Ever since Loki successfully conquered the English Isles, the seven kingdoms of England had become increasingly wary of the North Sea. Not only were ships patrolling the seas constantly, but patrols along the coastline had also increased exponentially. Eastward was impossible, and westward was impossible. The millennia-long autumn raids were practically a thing of the past. Within the kingdom, however, other risks arose. The monsters emerging from the icy sea were increasing in number year by year. Marindin not only had to contend with the bizarre monsters that daily appeared on the coastline with his limited military resources, but also faced an increasingly depleted treasury. The loss of the sacred mountain, which provided a stable source of potions, meant that the mainstay of Conqueror's fortress, the saber-toothed mercenaries, was dealt an unprecedented blow. She could no longer rely on the rotten potion produced by the lizardmen to mass-produce saber-toothed mercenaries, as she had during Ivar's reign. Marindin needed to consider the industrial transformation that affected every Viking household. She had to lead the Vikings in exploring alternative means of survival. Fortunately, she was Marindin. She was a business genius rarely seen in a century. The clever Viking queen found the only way out of her predicament, the refined potions found in the saga book. Bacchambus, obsessed with entering the divine realm and slaying monsters, had accumulated a vast amount of extraordinary materials in a single winter. Marindin keenly sensed the business opportunity within this. Naturally, she faced skepticism from established Viking dukes in Wolf Creek and the Bay. However, in times of crisis, she withstood the doubts and resolutely followed through on decisions she believed were right. This is the essential quality of a great leader. Selling the potion bestowed upon the Vikings by the god King Odin to the nobility of other nations wasn't exactly heroic. However, if faith in Odin alone could rebuild the 10 destroyed castles and repopulate the 2 desolate provinces of Dragon's Breath and Frost Ridge, Marindin would do it without hesitation. Everyone knew it was impossible. After several consecutive wars, this already weak nation needed a large amount of gold and silver to employ a sufficient labor force, which would then be used to build infrastructure. Any method was acceptable as long as it could generate income more efficiently. Bacchambus always considered his fellow warriors brothers. The Ra's true devotion was to the Hydra, Princess Hakorin. Even if a few were willing to switch sides with Odin, they were few and far between. The vast quantities of potions hunted from Asgard went unused, instead piling up in jars in warehouses, turning into thick blocks of ice over time. In the eyes of the Slavic king, this brother, though somewhat effeminate, was quite forthright. The two quickly signed a supply and demand contract. Bacchambus would sell the potions he hunted in Asgard to Marindin, and Marindin would provide him with all the resources he needed to conquer the divine realm. This included food, medicine, manpower, and weapons. The Slavic king would no longer have to worry about logistics during his campaigns in the divine realm. Marindin would use transport fleets to deliver everything he needed. He could pursue his adventures with peace of mind while simultaneously crafting the extraordinary materials needed to concoct his potions. Once trade routes were established, other goods produced within the Murmansk province, such as animal hides captured by Slavic hunters in the mountains, precious matsutek mushrooms, snow lotus, and dragon bones, could be sold to Viking merchants. Marindin would then build a spacious and luxurious shop in the Conqueror's fortress, packaging these goods in a manner that would appeal to the nobles of the western continent. This clever woman understood that all the animal hides, cold climate herbs, and dragon bones were merely icing on the cake. The true star product of the Conqueror's fortress was the precious potion that granted instant power without any side effects. And in a civilized society, a good product always requires exquisite packaging. In the bazaars of Constantinople, silk cloth from the Eastern Tang dynasty, sold by Arab merchants on the night market stalls, fetched only 2 gold dinars. But if it were placed in a shop by merchants from the eastern continent, lit with incense burners, and accompanied by singing girls playing the gukin, the price would instantly triple. The same was true for spices from India. Dirty Indians would wrap the spices in linen, stand in the scorching sun, and shout loudly, letting their saliva and sweat drip onto the precious incense. Tang merchants, however, would buy the spices at a low price, place them in exquisite bamboo jars, and then scribble mysterious Eastern characters on the outside of the jars. The price could increase as much as fivefold. Having spent her childhood roaming the streets of Constantinople, Merendin naturally understood the ins and outs of the trade. When potions from Murmansk arrived at the conqueror's fortress, she didn't rush to set up a stall to sell them. Instead, she stockpiled them and began constructing the Hall of Valor within the conqueror's fortress. This lavish building had nothing to do with religion, it was solely dedicated to the sale of potions. Whether it was depicting the heroic deeds of the Viking ancestors battling giants, dragons, and outer gods, or the free gladiatorial arena showcasing the might of the chosen of Valhalla, all of this preparation was designed to ensure a better price for the hard-earned potions. Merendin succeeded. Currently, in all power systems of the Western continent, holy bishops require missionary work to advance their sequence levels, while the flame-defeating temple requires completing tasks assigned by the fire priests. To gain power in either of these two belief systems, mortals must pay a price. And now, a third path has emerged. Simply drinking the potion could advance one to become a chosen one of the 13 paths of Valhalla, becoming a subject of the god King Odin. This was a deadly temptation for these noble children, instilled with the praises of heroes from childhood. The powerful Viking chosen tearing apart wolves and bears in the arena had fully demonstrated a potion's power. And Merendin cleverly employed a marketing strategy of starvation. Almost every storm acolyte exaggerated the difficulty of brewing the potion, claiming that each bottle of potion was the result of countless warriors' lives. This marketing strategy was incredibly effective. Previously, Ivar's saber-toothed mercenaries would need to drink at least 3 or 4 rot potions and advance to sequence 7 or 6 to fetch 60-80 gold coins. Now, however, Merendin could fetch a staggering 200 gold coins for a single sequence 9 potion. And that wasn't a daily occurrence. Merendin was a master of the art of bargaining. Scarcity makes things valuable. Every 2 or 3 days, she would deliberately cause some of the sequence potions to disappear, claiming that the hunting team had encountered unimaginable trouble, with almost all members perishing in Asgard. In the following days, when the potions reappeared, people would pay 500, even 800, gold coins a bottle. Those who bought the potions were nobles from France, the Visigoths, or Constantinople. Even if they drank the potion, they wouldn't necessarily take up arms in battle. It was simply a way to flaunt their divine powers in their exquisite palaces among the maids and ladies. They could openly display their divine powers to their partners, then cast aside their swords and embrace the tender beauty. I'm not one of those boring holy bishops or the ever-blind firebearers. I'm a true Odin. A rare devotee of the ancient god. Chapter 436 The Reign of the Empress, 3. The prosperity of a pillar industry can strengthen a city in all aspects. As wealthy nobles began to visit Conqueror's fortress, they would not only purchase potions but also stroll through the shopping streets and patronize the other shops run by the city's merchants. These shops sold rare Mediterranean furs like fox, bear, and ermine, as well as precious medicinal herbs like wild ginseng and matsutake. Beyond goods, the food, clothing, and shelter of the nobles and their attendants also fueled the city's prosperity. Sensing business opportunities, a large number of French and Byzantine merchants flocked to the city, bringing with them skilled chefs and beautiful maids, and began to build inns, restaurants, and experience centers for prostitutes. These new high-end businesses brought significant tax revenue to Merendin. Even as snow still fell in Conqueror's fortress, she could see her treasury rapidly growing. But this was only the first step in the Viking Renaissance. With the initial success of industrial transformation, the reconstruction of the provinces of Dragon's Breath Plateau and Frost Ridge was immediately put on the agenda. Merendin had already deeply learned a lesson from his previous failure. While the entire Western continent, under the holy bishop's ideal of equality for all, abandoned slave labor, continuing to rely heavily on Slavic slaves was a dangerous prospect. The sole reason Byzantine and Arab merchants came to this remote, desolate land to open mines and build factories was the incredibly low labor costs. But a closer look revealed that, like Loki, every household receiving fair wages for their workers would earn the overlord's considerable income from mining and farming. Now, he needed to rebuild the abandoned cities. Once the infrastructure was complete, he could train some of the Vikings to become mine owners and farmers. This was the path to long-term development. However, achieving this was no easy task. Within the 2 abandoned provinces, he needed to build at least 2 docks, 2 main cities with markets, hospitals, and churches capable of housing 10,000 people, and at least 10 castles for his vassals. Simply relying on the profit from potion sales was insufficient to accomplish this feat. According to dark medieval thinking, the best way to quickly raise large sums of money was to wage war. However, for Merindon, the only troops he possessed were the 5,000 saber-toothed mercenaries who had survived the previous year. This limited force was barely enough to defend his homeland from invasion. Giving up was never a Viking princess style. Carrying an entire nation on her shoulders, even a fragile woman must learn to grow quickly. After racking her brains for an entire winter, she recalled meeting the great shipowner Garmarish at Loki's wedding. 2 months prior, she had sent envoys across the frozen sea on griffins, making the long journey to Constantinople to track him down. Now, as the sea ice finally thawed, old Gore, clad in a golden brocade robe, finally appeared before the Viking princess. "Your Majesty, you mentioned a monster landing on the shore. What kind of monster? Are there any corpses? Could you show me?" The Viking queen smiled wryly and shook her head. Sartre and Wenzoff had already explained this old man to her at their wedding last year. Despite his 50s, he possessed a soul eager to travel the world and embrace extreme freedom. Sure enough, before she could finish her sentence, she was immediately drawn to Merindon's casual mention of the monster landing. With a few quaffs, the queen returned to the topic of making money. Mr. Gore, I heard that you have an exclusive route to the New World. That's what I think. I have in my hands the complete magic potion from the Book of Saga, as well as various goods hunted by Slavic hunters. And you have a route from the New World. I want to go to Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire, Paris, the capital of the French Duchy, and Seville in the Free City of Visigoths this summer to buy 3 properties and build 3 shops. You also know that I was a partner of the Izumo Trading Company in the Tang Dynasty, so I know the rules of how trading companies operate. I wonder if we can jointly set up a new trading company. We sell these goods that only you and I can find. Halfway through her words, Merindon found that the old man sitting opposite her had his eyes rolling around, as if he had not heard what she said at all. Noticing that the face of the woman opposite her was gradually getting colder, old Gar blushed and waved his hand hurriedly. Your Majesty, I didn't mean that. It's just that the thing you just mentioned, huge monsters crashing through the ice all winter, is indeed of great significance. He pulled a silver arm guard from the package and placed it on the round table between them with a thud. Your Majesty, you must already know the story of how Loki, and that young explorer from Constantinople crossed the frozen sea and explored the north 3 years ago. You personally sent that young explorer to Hanshu village. You surely remember. Merindon nodded. Old Gore's eyes sparkled with stars as he picked up the arm guard from the table again and placed it before the queen. There we found a sleeping giant, as huge as an island. From its back, a gorgon, a creature that lived thousands of years ago, emerged. After slaying the gorgon, we found this arm guard in her abdomen. The young explorer, after careful examination, said it must have been worn by the chosen ones of the Temple of Zeus during the Greek city-state era 2,000 years ago. Then we followed the cave on the beast's back and penetrated deep into the city on its back. On that voyage, Loki brought 2 ships with him, totaling over 100 people. However, of these 100, only Old Gore, Emma Waldorf, and Reverend Lawrence were able to accompany him throughout the entire journey. The other Vikings on the ship had fabricated stories based on their own adventures, embellished with fabrications. Much of their adventures were drunken rants and nonsense. After hearing Old Gore's recounting of the incident, Merindon finally understood the entire story. Your Highness, I've been inside that Black Pyramid before, and I know what's hidden inside. There are dozens of mountains of gold coins, and thousands of precious artifacts collected by the Illuminati from various human civilizations from ancient times, gemstones, crowns, weapons, ancient scrolls, and books. It's a treasure trove of everything. Chapter 437 The Reign of the Empress, 4. As the 2 men continued their conversation, Old Gore's shoulders and the corners of his mouth began to tremble slightly. He was now a completely different person from the blacksmith forging iron in the river valley 3 years ago. When he left Hanshu village 3 years ago, he had only a 3-masted ship exchanged from Loki and 20 sailors. Now, he commanded a fleet of 50 ships and 600 employees. He led his team back and forth between the New World and Constantinople, meeting only dignitaries and entering and leaving the palaces of the emperor. He had a deeper understanding of what was hidden in the obsidian pyramid. Your Majesty, I'm wondering, If those monsters were able to escape by tunneling through the behemoth's carcass, doesn't that mean we can also enter through that tunnel, find the ruins of the obsidian pyramid, and retrieve the gold coins within? May the god of fertility, Frey, protect us. With over a dozen gold mountains, who would bother to build a shop and sell potions? I guarantee even Mikhail I never saw so much gold in his life, not to mention the treasures piled atop those gold mountains. I have a strong feeling that every one of those treasures is a lost gem from the long history of human civilization. So, is there a way forward? Compared to the excited Olgor, Merindin displayed a touch of womanly caution. Gently kneading her brow, she pondered a crucial question. Could the Illuminati have preempted the attack and already been hiding around Leviathan's corpse, preparing to excavate within? It was certainly a possibility. But upon closer consideration, it seemed unlikely. Leviathan's hiding place was likely a highly guarded secret for most Illuminati members. After all, wealth is a powerful temptation. If the obsidian pyramid truly contains such a vast treasure, mortals would be powerless to resist the allure. Therefore, only members of the rank of the 12 lords could know Leviathan's hiding place. Furthermore, the fact that Leviathan's hiding place was revealed at all was a highly coincidental event. Windswan was devoured by the beast for nearly 1,000 years, yet he never gave up hope of survival. He recorded his experiences in writing and drawings on undigested hides, which he then stuffed into bone tubes, which were then expelled by the Leviathan. Over the course of 1,000 years, countless bone tubes vanished into the ocean, but the gods ultimately reward the diligent. Eventually, one drifted ashore and, after many twists and turns, found its way into the hands of Tang merchants. They brought it back to their homeland, where it came into the possession of the Tang King Li family. 50 years ago, Emperor Xuanzong of Tang, Li Longji, invested heavily in compiling the general map of the world. He entrusted the mysterious Erosion country volume to the traveler Xiaolu. However, Xiaolu happened to be a holy bishop monk. This was unexpected even by the knowledgeable Lord of Earthsea, Mewtwo. He assumed Xiaolu's notebook was merely an ordinary ancient scroll recording the hiding places of the outer gods, so he casually distributed it to peripheral members of the Illuminati, asking them to search for it. The notebook eventually came into the hands of a security guard at the Izumo Trading Company in Yorkshire. Of Tang descent, the security guard always held his Eastern Continent predecessors in the highest respect. He attempted to understand the ancient book through various techniques, including the diplomatic school, the Shushan sword school, and the Mahis mechanical techniques, but could never grasp its profound meaning. He eventually gave up. However, Loki, using his fluent Chinese, tricked the ancient scroll into his possession by posing as a disciple of Old Valder. This incident demonstrates that few in the world know Leviathan's whereabouts. Even within the Illuminati, not all of the 12 leaders are aware. Furthermore, since Leviathan's destruction by Feng Huzi, and subsequent burrowing into the brain of the sun sacrifice Yum, who devoured 200 million years of accumulated life essence, much has also transpired on Mewtwo's side. After destroying Leviathan, Loki returned to the valley, only to be confronted by a joint invasion by England and the Slavs. During this time, Quackenbush, deceived by the storm monk Wise Nibru, impulsively decided to attack the Holy Mountain. This sudden development exposed the Illuminati's operations in Scandinavia to the Vikings. Mewtwo was forced to personally deal with this formidable problem, Loki. The following year, during the Viking invasion of England, he traveled from France to Yun province, using burrowing worms and all his forces to capture Loki alive. However, to this day, he remains mired in this quagmire. Merindin carefully reviewed everything that had happened over the past 3 years. With one event after another happening so rapidly and drastically, even if Mewtwo had learned of Leviathan's serious troubles through the monsters coming ashore, he might not have had the time to organize a rescue operation. The only possibility was that he had enlisted the help of several other of the 12 lords to salvage Leviathan's body. But upon closer examination, this seemed unlikely. As the old saying goes, wealth seduces the heart. How could such a vast fortune be shared with others? As the ruler of France, Mewtwo would surely have kept it within his own treasury. Another strong indicator of this was that when he mobilized his monster army to fight Loki to the death, even when he was completely destitute of ammunition and food, the other 11 lords offered no assistance. They might not have known that the Asgard portal was in Mewtwo's possession. Of course, there was another possibility. They had absolutely no interest in the Asgard portal. Leviathan's corpse is likely still floating silently in that sea, The final point to consider is whether the treasures could have been vaporized and destroyed by the explosion within the beast's body. While this possibility is possible, it's also unlikely. According to Old Gore's description, the city built on the beast's back is located within a gap beneath its carapace. Even if its internal organs were shattered by the explosion, the buffering space between them would still contain a large amount of air, temporarily preserving food and water. The constant occurrence of monsters coming ashore over the past 2 years suggests that a large number of monsters and outer gods have survived the onslaught. In the eyes of monsters and outer gods, these heavy yellow metals are utterly useless garbage, and they would certainly have no interest in them. The gold and silver are most likely still preserved in the ruins of the pyramid. Time passed. In her spacious study, Merendin continued to write and draw with banknotes in hand. This was the subconscious reaction her mind only reacted to when it was racing. Seeing this, Old Gore tactfully walked to the balcony, leaning his hands on the tall railing. He peeked through the gap and gazed down at the bustling streets below, just beginning to light up. All day, Merendin turned down all other visiting envoys. When she initially determined that Muta was likely overwhelmed, exploring the obsidian pyramid beneath Leviathan's shell seemed a worthwhile undertaking. Then came the extended period of finalizing the details. Old Gore possessed a fleet of 50 ships, staffed by sailors from various nations across the western continent, nearly a third of whom were chosen by various deities. Such a fleet would easily facilitate maritime trade, but it would be insufficient for excavating Leviathan's corpse. He needed at least 3,000 skilled saber-tooth mercenaries from Merendin to maintain the excavation. Leviathan's corpse was likely to harbor numerous surviving monsters, and a large number of professional soldiers would be essential in any battle against such a terrifying force. Of course, there was the most important question: if the treasure was truly discovered, how would they divide it? From the moment the lights came on, to the full moon rising, to the dawn of the next day, their discussion remained unfinished. Alfred, who had handed over his business card the day before, sighed regretfully and departed the palace. Chapter 438 Alfred's Doubts. In terms of combat prowess, vision, way of thinking, and even intellectual prowess, Alfred, having received the finest education since childhood, was undoubtedly a leader among young men. But don't forget, he was only 15 years old. Born in the royal palace of Wessex, he grew up under the care of hundreds of servants. After displaying his remarkable intelligence and talent for battle, Egbert lavishly enrolled him in the Pantheon in Constantinople, where he received the finest education in the western continent. There, Alfred met future rulers and prominent figures, all of whom were dedicated to their service, unconditionally answering their questions and fulfilling their every need. Throughout his life, he never suffered the slightest injustice. Even after Wessex lost the war against Loki, he was adopted by Loki as his son, and his treatment remained unchanged. Loki had his most powerful ally, Bakenboshi, personally guide him to Asgard to hone his combat and survival skills. Even in his daily life, he was given free rein rather than oversight. He could do whatever he pleased. It was clear that this was a crown prince who had never asked for help. When Normandy was in trouble, he was able to use his knowledge to discern that reinforcements were what Normandy needed most. He also knew that when no one was willing to go out and ask for help, he had to step forward and offer the Normans a chance to turn the tide. But one cannot accomplish something they have never done before. Under the training of Bakenbush, Alfred had become a master swordsman. But asking a crown prince who had never asked for help in his life to assume the duties of a diplomat, to simply ask for reinforcements in times of crisis with just words, was a tall order for Alfred. After submitting his business card, Alfred was left alone in the reception room by Merendin for an entire day. He began to doubt whether he had overestimated the importance of his status as the adopted son of Duke Loki, of the 7 kingdoms of England. Thanks to Egbert's strong hand, the rulers of the other 6 kingdoms were compelled to show him some favor. Not to mention the difficulty of meeting him after presenting a business card. Simply hearing the news of his impending visit would force the rulers to prepare days in advance, dispatching envoys to greet him along the official road. The refusal he received at the gates of Malindon was the first such rejection in his life. Alfred gazed at the setting sun, which was once again tumbling below the horizon, and took a deep gulp from his coffee. Without honey and milk, the coffee was far more bitter than fragrant. Drinking coffee in the inn of the Conqueror's fortress was beyond his imagination of this barren land. He needed this bitter, refreshing drink to reflect on what had gone wrong. Was I too conservative? Could it be that in the land of fire, I should have ignored their battle, brazenly interrupted them, and demanded that my master bring reinforcements to Normandy? Or, in the Conqueror's fortress, should I force my way into the Viking Queen's reception room and force her to see me? Given her steadfast alliance with her adoptive father, she should have helped. But this would be like a petty act of betrayal, forcing an ally to drop their work to support me. Is this really the right thing to do? Sipping his coffee, Alfred didn't know how to answer this question. He couldn't help but admire the diplomats and socialites who made a living out of socializing. Their work seemed easy and comfortable, simply wearing exquisite gowns, frequenting the palaces of royal nobles, drinking time-honored fine wines, and discussing seemingly insignificant matters. Yet, it was these very people who could secure contracts that even kings struggled to secure, and even defuse crises before war broke out. Your Highness, you've done everything you could for these Yankees. The Queen might not see you because they have their own contradictions. I've seen enough hypocrites in my life. These politicians are always saying one thing to your face and another behind your back. They appear affectionate and family-like on the surface, but when the time comes, they duck faster than cockroaches. Sky Knight Trueheart sat across from Alfred, chugging a mug of ale. The former chief mercenary of Wessex was now Alfred's personal bodyguard, accompanying him wherever he went. In Lao Tu's eyes, your adoptive father and the Viking Queen have a simple divorce relationship of a third party taking the position and squeezing out the legal wife. There's nothing wrong with that. If I were Lao Tu, I would also choose the young, beautiful, and soft as cloud Mercian princess. The Queen is indeed still as charming as ever, and has some of the coquettishness of a socialite from the Holy City. But she is old after all. It's normal for men to get tired of the old and love the new, but how can the Queen not feel unhappy when she sleeps on a cold bed every day? Don't insist, she won't see you even if you waste another month. Gudong. Trueheart grabbed the beer in his hand and drank it all, and his big square face turned red in an instant. Hey, why don't you reconsider our proposal to hide out in the New World for a few years? I know you nobles value your reputation, but with all due respect, without reinforcements, relying solely on the few thousand Vikings in Normandy wouldn't even be enough to fill the teeth of those French beasts. 300 dragons soar into the sky, washing the land from south to north with flames. Tisk, tisk, those giants and berserkers will all be reduced to ashes in a day. Didn't you see that before we set out? The English farmers, having heard the news of the war, were already driving their ox carts and fleeing. This time, no amount of persuasion will work, haha. If it were me, I'd run away immediately, rather than stay and wait to be roasted by the dragons. As long as there's green mountains, there's firewood. Losing our house and land doesn't matter, saving our lives is what matters. Ever since rescuing Alfred from tens of thousands of parasite bearers in Yun province, Trueheart had been free to speak his mind. But Alfred ignored his nagging. One was a noble, the other a mercenary. This difference in status necessitated a starkly different way of thinking. Trueheart, born into the common people, was a complete hedonist. As long as he lived, had money, women, and ale, he was happy. However, Alfred's aspirations were far higher. From the moment he entered the Pantheon in Constantinople, Roman scholars had taught him that a king's mission was to protect the lives of his subjects and perpetuate the glory of civilization. A vague feeling welled within him. Perhaps this conflict between the Normans and the French was Wessex's only chance to break free from the Illuminati's domination. If lost, the next opportunity wouldn't appear for centuries. I can't give up yet, but what else can I do now? Where can I find new allies? Alfred racked his brain, searching for possible allies who might help him. I've made quite a few friends in the Pantheon, but the oldest of them is only 16, hardly old enough to take charge. Should we visit Seville, the capital of the free city of the Visigoths? Perhaps Horst Tally, having learned that France has fallen under the control of the lizardmen, could offer some assistance? No, that's too far away. Can the Celts, exiled to the Northern Isles, be trusted? Also no, these Saturn worshippers are completely incapable of fighting. If that doesn't work out, I'll continue submitting my business card to the Empress tomorrow. The coffee in his cup had grown cold, and Alfred's temples felt tingling from overwork, leaving him feeling groggy. The exhaustion from constantly running around and waiting in the reception room all day seemed to burst forth at this moment. He gently rested his burning face against a cool marble tabletop, but soon, fatigue washed over him. Before he completely lost consciousness, the last image he saw through his almost completely closed eyes was Trueheart wielding a knife and fork and devouring his meal. Haha, these French people are truly amazing. Wherever they go, they turn local ingredients into works of art. I never imagined this black buck would be so delicious when cooked. Your Highness, if you don't eat it all, I will. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 439 The Sudden Appearance of Allies. Exhausted, Alfred had no idea how long he'd slept. When he rubbed his aching shoulder and awoke again, the once bustling restaurant was completely silent. Sky Knight Tauhert, who had been sitting in the same private room with him, was nowhere to be seen. Cautiously standing up in the pitch darkness, Alfred instinctively drew his broadsword. What was unfolding before his eyes was undoubtedly abnormal. After leaving the Conqueror's fortress, he visited the House of Savoy, a restaurant with a centuries-old French culinary heritage. After a winter of renovations, the House of Savoy, Conqueror's fortress, had only officially opened 2 months earlier. The restaurant retained the century-old establishment's classic design, dining downstairs, accommodation upstairs. Alfred had previously visited the Southampton and Constantinople branches of the house and knew their hallmark of attentive service. Because only in this way could they defeat their old rival. The Caesar Ritz, which stood almost permanently across the street, had always been open all night. The Savoy's restaurant was always open all night, allowing guests to enjoy delicious food at any time of the day. Even if the Conqueror's Fortress branch couldn't support 3 shifts due to a shortage of chefs, they would have woken him up when closing time came. Even if the waiter had been negligent, Tauhert would have remembered that he had left alone. So, there had to be something strange happening before his eyes. Drawing his broadsword, Alfred didn't immediately search the restaurant. He first retreated to the window and gently parted the curtains, gazing upon the dark street, empty. Only a crimson full moon hung in the center of the gloomy sky. I was right, I've truly fallen into some kind of hallucination. He lowered the curtains and closed the window again. Suddenly, a faint red light flickered from the door of a private room not far from him. Alfred, his steps overlapping, slowly approached the door. The surroundings were pitch black, lit only by a single red candle in the private room. Lifting the curtain, Alfred saw a woman kneeling in the center. The dim crimson candlelight outlined her features, barely making out a crimson veil covering her face, her curvaceous figure shrouded in a thick, dark red robe. Prince Alfred, you are truly not an easy target. In just 12 days, you crossed the North Sea, passing through Warsaw, Kiev, and Murmansk, then immediately turned back across the North Sea and flew over the sky-breaking mountains. We put in a tremendous effort to catch up with you. If this Viking queen hadn't left you out for a day and a night, my men might still be led around the world by your nose. But fortunately, we met you at the Conqueror's fortress, the woman spoke in a deep voice as Alfred slowly approached. Her voice was naturally raspy, not pleasant to the ear, but strangely soothing. Your Highness, please be patient. I am not your enemy, we have to meet in this way today. The Scandinavian peninsula is not a territory where I can travel freely. This area belongs to the Archbishop Sisas among the 5 Fire Kings. He is my enemy, not to mention that your Duke Loki just killed his beloved disciple Abyssal Fish not long ago. It takes a lot of resources to train any phoenix pathologist. Archbishop Sisas is quite dissatisfied with what you have done. The fire transmitters densely spread across this city are almost always looking for the flaws of your Lord Duke. Therefore, I can only use the witch pathologist I am sitting with to pull you into the illusion. Only here can we talk safely. Please sit down. Looking around, Alfred felt that he didn't seem to have any other choice, so he could only sit in front of the woman in red. Let me introduce myself. My name is Mirror Master Mikoa. I am the Fire Bishop of the Fire Temple in Paris. Father Francis found me before you entered the courtroom. All the help you received during your retreat came from my people. The Fire Thief, High Sparrow, who is responsible for receiving you, is also one of my men. Seeing the suspicion still flickering in Alfred's eyes, Mikoa was not surprised at all. She gently raised a finger, as if listening to the air. On the other side, Bishop Francis sends you his greetings. Since you two parted in Crocodile Canyon, he has now successfully infiltrated the city of Paris. Although the Holy Fire Temple in Paris has been surrounded by torture monks, we are still safe for the time being. You can rest assured. Still don't believe it? It doesn't matter. Let me give you some more intuitive evidence. Mikoa closed his eyes, his lips moved slightly, and after more than 10 seconds he said in a deep voice, Bishop Francis said that when you parted, he took a total of 3 broom leaves, 7 imperial flower silver coins, and 27 copper leaves. This time you can believe that he is sitting in front of me, right? Oh, Your Highness, you may not know yet, I am the chosen one of the Zoroastrianism's flame demon path. With my level of practice, I can create 5 identical element mirrors, which means I can appear in 5 different places at the same time, and the 5 clones can communicate with each other anytime and anywhere. As long as one person survives, I can accumulate spiritual energy again and create a mirror again. The thoughts Mikroa expressed matched Alfred's memories perfectly. Furthermore, she unreservedly revealed her chosen abilities to Alfred. This was no mean feat for a firebringer. Dozens of new, outer, and old gods still exist, each passing down hundreds of distinct paths to ascension, none of which could fully comprehend. Under any circumstances, revealing one's abilities to a stranger was an extremely dangerous act, so, it seemed this mysterious and powerful woman wasn't his enemy. Alfred set down his broadsword and sat down across from her. I accepted your substantial deposit, yet failed to complete my mission, causing your men to suffer unwarranted losses. For this, I deeply apologize. However, I hope your Highness understands that none of this was my intention. It's the product of a traitor within our Zoroastrian church. That night in Versailles Castle, it was Archbishop Sassasis Mushishi, the Firefly Swarm, who suddenly arrived with a Firefly Swarm, causing you and me to suffer enormous losses. At first, I thought it was simply a gang feud within the Pope. The High Sparrow has been incredibly powerful in recent years, and his refusal to join Archbishop Sassasis' ranks may have angered him. But as more and more hidden evidence emerges, I realize our Pope seems to have switched sides with the Illuminati. The Zoroastrian Church exists to dispel darkness and spread the light of civilization. It's absolutely impossible for us to become tools in the hands of the lizardmen. Alfred could feel his heart pounding. He had a premonition that his half-month of hard work had not been in vain. Dear Master Alfred, you are right. Let me, Mikroa, be your ally and help you overthrow this King of Earthsea. Chapter 445 Great Fire Kings. The Firebringers are a very special group in this land, especially those who have ascended to the rank of Firebringer Priest or Firebringer Bishop. They may appear solitary, but in reality, they may be harboring a vast army. Time is pressing, but the enemy is formidable. Upon discovering the campfire bug swarm at Versailles Castle, I immediately concealed myself and awakened my slumbering master, the Firebringer, one of the 5 Cinder Kings. Alfred's eyes widened. As the only church in the New God faith to rival the Holy Bishop in size, the Zoroastrianism's entire composition was naturally studied in detail by the scholars in Constantinople. During their time studying at the Pantheon, the scholars had already thoroughly educated all students about the 5 Cinder Kings and their abilities. The first Cinder King was, of course, Archbishop Sassas, the Pope residing in the Holy Land of Firebringer, Jerusalem. He was the only human of the 5 Cinder Kings and the one who appeared most often. The second was Agnes the Unburnt. Rumor has it that this is the most powerful of the 5 Cinder Lords, yet also the most brutal and evil. His name also comes from the English word annoy, pain. The third is known as Whitewasher Keladon. He is rumored to be the chief steward of the Zoroastrianism, in charge of the most valuable secrets uncovered in the nearly 1,000 years since the Pope's founding. Whitewasher Keladon holds the highest bounty for a human being from the major kingdoms of the Western continent. Anyone who can reveal his whereabouts, let alone capture him, will be rewarded with untold wealth by the Zoroastrianism. The fourth is the Cinder Lord Hamer the Lighter, who has been missing for nearly a century. Rumors circulate throughout the Western continent that this Cinder Lord was killed by hermits from the Eastern continent during a conflict, but this remains unconfirmed. The fifth is the most mysterious figure in the Zoroastrianism, the Firebringer. Even the most senior maesters in Constantinople know very little about the Firebringer. For one thing, no one knows his specific name, nor does anyone know whether he is human or an outer god sent from outer space. Secondly, the few available sources indicate that the Firebringer was almost permanently dormant, awakening only briefly when personally appointed by a disciple. Upon awakening, he appeared to be unable to move, leading scholars to speculate that he was likely a crippled creature with limited mobility. However, scholars were certain of his unparalleled divination abilities. His divination skills transcended mere divination, transforming into terrifying power from another dimension. Of the 6 recorded awakenings, the Firebringer performed 5 divinations, each successfully turning the tide of battle. The most famous instance is recorded in the ancient Greek text the Odyssey 1,300 years ago, when Xerxes was helpless against the 300 warriors defending Thermopylae. The firebearer, accompanying his troops, suddenly opened his eyes. Extending a three-fingered hand, he teleported a hunched shepherd named Iphitus to the Persian king Xerxes. It was he who pointed out a narrow mountain pass near Thermopylae, known only to shepherds. With this intelligence, Xerxes launched a pincer attack, ultimately crushing the resistance of the Spartan king Leonidas. A considerable number of Byzantine scholars believe that the Firebringer was most likely the oldest deity within the Zoroastrianism, perhaps even the cornerstone of the cult's millennia of existence. For centuries, the Crusaders, the Silent Sisters, the Bloody Martyrs, and the Inquisition, all internal orders of the holy bishops, had sought to locate the Firebringer, but to no avail. Alfred had never imagined that a localized conflict between the Normans and the French would disturb this deity. It seemed that the Cinder King schism within the Zoroastrianism was more complex than he had anticipated. My dear prince, what follows may be beyond your comprehension, but please know that we are not your enemies. A cold breeze blew in through the window, casting a faint crimson glow from the crimson moonlight into the room. The once steady candlelight before them began to flicker. Just as it was about to go out, Mikroa removed the red veil covering her chin. Before he could get a good look at the woman's features, she blew gently on the candle, extinguishing the flickering flame. The room was instantly engulfed in darkness. Alfred felt as if he were soaking in a warm spring stream. But he knew it wasn't water, but the sensation of pure psychic energy surging around him. When the darkness vanished and light returned, he was struck by the blinding sunlight. He shielded himself with his hands, finally adjusting to the sudden brightness, and struggled to rise from the ground. Where the hell is this? Why are my clothes wet? He relaxed his stiff neck and felt a cool morning breeze. The first thing Alfred saw was the boundless sea. Turning back, he found himself standing on a simple dock. Why is this dock so shabby? This isn't a dock at Conqueror's Fortress. Where's this? Could it be that I'm still in an illusion? That's impossible. Illusions can only be composed of small spaces with limited details, and this shabby dock I'm standing on is nestled between the earth and the sea. No illusionist could create a realistic scene of such complexity. Alfred narrowed his eyes and looked around. It was early summer, and the women of Paris had even shed their cloth for veils, yet it was still cold here. This meant I was still in Scandinavia. In the distance, emerald green hills and several towering peaks reached the clouds. This was undoubtedly the sky-breaking mountains. So, the question was, why had Mikroa teleported me here? Could there be some powerful force hiding in this uninhabited wilderness? Confused, he wandered around the shabby dock for a few seconds when a loud horn suddenly blared from the sea. 1, 2, 3, 5 Chinese ships, all still flying the flag of Normandy. Alfred glanced around once more, confirming he was no longer near Storm's End. He had a vague feeling that all these questions might only be answered when the ship docked. Standing alone at the top of the dock, Alfred quietly waited for the ship to dock. Just as he could make out a figure, a warm greeting suddenly rang out from the opposite ship. My dear brother, how come you are here? Chapter 441 Strong Support. Alice. Alfred narrowed his eyes, gazing at the white-clad girl standing at the bow of the ship. Though his face was too far to be clearly discerned, the delicate crocodile skin robe rustling in the cold wind suggested she must be a noble well-versed in the fashion trends of the Western continent. As the ship approached the dock, his suspicions were confirmed. The girl standing at the bow was his nominal sister, Alice L., a hostage sent to Loki by King Lii of Northumbria. Alfred? It's really you. Hail Mary. Since arriving in this desolate place, I finally see a familiar face. Alice hopped gracefully from the ship and rushed to Alfred, giving him a huge hug. Alice and Alfred were old acquaintances. As children, they had both attended school in Constantinople. Although Alice attended a girls' school, being from the same English Isles meant they often ran into each other at school socials. Alice L. was profoundly influenced by her biological mother. From a young age, Alice's mother nurtured her into a true lady of the Western continent's aristocracy. She mastered how to showcase her every strength, perfectly orchestrating her attire, language, and makeup to the utmost effect. This, of course, also included the inherent gender dynamics of a young woman. Throughout the Western continent, the Kingdom of Northumbria was a relatively unremarkable presence. Both its national strength and commercial influence were considered mediocre among small states. Despite this, during her 7 years at the girls' school, Alice had befriended nearly every prominent figure in Constantinople. Her efficiency rivaled that of Alfred, who graduated first from the Pantheon, arriving all the way from the Kiev province on the eastern shore across the Baltic Sea. Alice's face flushed red from the cold. Even more painful was the fact that all the Viking and Slavic men on board were unromantic and wooden. The aesthetics of Slavic and Viking men were completely different from those of the Western continent's southern gentlemen. In this cold and desolate land, the most sought-after women are those with exaggerated busts, hips, and waists. Beauty is desirable, but survival in this desolate land is crucial. Large hips indicate fertility. A large waist indicates a large belly fat reserve, enabling the woman to withstand the long, cold winters. And a large bust indicates ample milk supply, making it more likely that her children will survive early in life. Alice Eller, with her willow-thin waist, met none of these requirements. Furthermore, this delicate young woman was incapable of labor or hunting. To these northern brute men, such a woman was no more than a useless person. Being ignored by these blind men was one thing, but even worse, they could neither understand nor speak Alice's usual English and French. Going out to sea with them was like being trapped in a cold cage, a cage filled with a foul odor. Because the two ships were transporting only wild beasts from the icy taiga of Murmansk, I simply cannot understand why my adoptive father would entrust this beastly task to me. Haha, you have no idea how formidable those blue-skinned beasts are, merciful mother, I commit blasphemy, amen. Having finally found someone to talk to, Alice didn't even bother to ask why he was standing alone on the dock. Instead, she launched into a rant. However, when these words reached Alfred's ears, he keenly caught the word, giant. Let me find them dragons. In the name of the Virgin Mary, and please forgive the swearing that follows, I'm a lady, but where the hell am I supposed to catch dragons for these blue, fat-bellied men? Those 70 or so dragons my foster father captured from your homeland were meant for breeding. I never imagined these gluttons with no sense of restraint would devour them all, eggs and all, in 3 months. They have no idea about sustainable development. I'm so pissed, Alice cursed furiously. Although she had yelled the same thing countless times at the Vikings and Slavs in recent months, due to the language barrier, the pale men only looked at her with confused, vacant eyes. At such moments, the Northumbrian princess felt like a pitiful, abandoned pet. It's all this damn foster father's fault. Sooner or later I'm going to have to figure out a way. Forget it, I just don't have any fucking solution, my dear brother. You can see, this old guy threw me into this godforsaken place and made me responsible for the food and daily life of these blue-skinned ancestors. Now there's no food, I can only lead the fleet to Murmansk to bring back a bunch of people, bears, dire wolves and so on for them. It's a pity that these ships are not big enough. If I could bring back a few mammoths, I guess I could at least have peace for a few months. These ancestors have such a huge appetite. If I don't fucking feed them, if they go into the town and eat people, I'll be in big trouble. I really don't understand why old Loki invited these old immortal creatures back from Outland. Oh, please forgive my swearing again. Alfred didn't hear a word of this long complaint. In his ears, he just kept thinking about the two simple words giant and dragon. My foster father actually has such an ally. How come I've never heard him mention this before? From these two simple words, he seemed to smell a hint of opportunity. Alice paused for a moment. Alfred frowned and raised his right hand. How many of those blue-skinned ancestors are there? Haha, the girl sneered again. Including big and small ones, plus a dozen or so particularly large ones, over 2,000, they've built a complex city in the Cheyenne Mountains. I dare not go too deep. I'm not exactly sure how many there are. They like to eat dragons. Yes, Alice nodded. The kind of dragons ridden by dragon riders, the kind that can fly in the sky and spit fire. Yes, are there any other dragons on our continent? Thank you Mikoa. Thank you Firebringer. Alfred clasped his hands together, cupped Alice's cheeks in front of her horrified eyes, and kissed her forehead deeply. You really deserve the title of Lord of Fire, my dear sister. Immediately command all Viking brothers to release these beasts from the pens and release them into the dense forests of the Cheyenne Mountains. What? Alice widened her eyes. Are you crazy? You don't know how much energy we spent to catch these rations. You're right, Alfred replied with a smile. This is rations. They can't be left alone. Only by making these giants fall into deeper hunger can they become our allies. Chapter 442 Expert's Late Night Visit. There are no eternal enemies between nations, only eternal interests. Your Highness Egbert, seeing your face appear in my rainy heights, I am even more convinced that our Duke Loki is the reincarnation of a god. His teachings are always concise and to the point. Outside the Duke of Normandy's residence, Jerome, acting lord of the city, approached with a smile and gently took Egbert's whip. The King of Wessex, disguised as a traveling merchant, arrived at Rainy Heights unaccompanied by any guards. In the Western continent, holding the horse and whipping is considered a sign of lowering one's status. For the Normans at this moment, there was no longer any heirs left to maintain. In less than a month, a large number of the English people who had originally lived in this land had fled en masse. Farmers even spread rumors that Duke Loki had died in the Inquisition in Paris. Jerome didn't know how to comfort the fleeing people. After a long month, even he himself was still unsure whether Duke Loki was dead or alive. But he was certain that war between France and Normandy was inevitable. By this time, all the vassal states of Normandy were already on their way with their armies. Egbert's appearance at this moment was certainly not an act of hostility. Entering the Duke's palace, he dismissed everyone around him. When only the two of them remained in the empty study, Egbert spoke directly to Jerome, concealing nothing. Archmaster Jerome, last night I received a call from Edward Plantagenet, requiring me to organize a militia of no fewer than 100,000 men to assist Earl Vanderkamp, Duke of Lorraine, and Fabricio, Duke of Corsica, in their joint attack on Normandy. Let's be frank. My eldest son, Alfred, has already met with me. I'm deeply sorry that he violated the hostage exchange agreement between our two countries. I deeply apologize for this, but you understand that now it seems all is irrelevant. Jerome nodded. In peacetime, this might have been a diplomatic incident, but with Normandy in imminent danger of destruction, no one would pay attention to the whereabouts of a 15-year-old. Alfred has told me all about his trip to Paris with Duke Loki. Honestly, I'm deeply shocked. Humanity can be ruled by humans, even succumbing to the new gods born from within humanity, but under no circumstances should it be secretly controlled by a group of evil beings of unknown origin. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, I, Wessex, am willing to break free from the control of the Plantagenet family. On the other hand, there are nearly 2 million Wessex residents within our borders. I cannot arbitrarily decide their fate today. I hope Your Excellency the Rector will understand this. Jerome nodded. The scene before him felt familiar. It seemed as if 3 years ago, when Coldwater Village was about to face Sweyn Gonk's attack, Old Man Hummel had come late at night and said the same thing. But Egbert was clearly much more candid than the old fox Hummel. He genuinely intended to form an alliance, speaking openly and candidly with the Normans. I've sent secret envoys to share everything I know with the other 6 lords. And at this moment, I hope you understand that everyone on this continent has their eyes on you. If you can give our militia a glimmer of hope in defeating French hegemony, we will help you achieve this remarkable feat. Jerome smiled and shook his head. Most lords in the world are alike. 3 years ago, Hummel Bloodpigeon made the same decision as Egbert. He led his troops to wait outside Coldwater Village, waiting until they were about to defeat Sweyn Gunk before leading his troops in to reap the spoils. After the battle, the Coldwater defenders were nearly annihilated. Bloodpigeon, however, managed to preserve a large number of its men, storming into Mistduck and plundering it. Having served as acting lord many times, Jerome now understood the ways of thinking of a lord. If the Normans could win this battle, it would be a win-win for Wessex. But Egbert had to admit he'd overestimated the forces at the disposal of his Norman vassal. After the decisive battle with Wessex last year, only 2,000 of the 6,000 troops Loki had brought with him, despite having spent all his money on them, remained. After a winter of rest and recuperation, along with a small number of immigrants from the mainland and Slavs, and nearly 1,000 English militiamen willing to join the Viking army, the combined forces of the two provinces could now muster less than 4,000 men. By comparison, the two provinces contributing troops to France were formidable in terms of combat power. Of France's 21 provinces, Lorraine was undoubtedly one of the top 3 in terms of wealth. From Jerome's knowledge of Earl Vanderkamp, Duke of Lorraine, he could easily muster at least 30,000 private troops with a single wave of his hand. And that was just Lorraine itself. Even more formidable was Corsica. This island, isolated from the French mainland, was the breeding ground for dragons among the 21 provinces. This island alone is roughly the size of the entire territory of Wessex. Conservative estimates suggest that Corsica is home to over 2,000 dragons. These dragons soar throughout the Mediterranean, acting as a definitive barrier to the southern French duchy. The Duke of Corsica, Fabricio, is a formidable dragon rider. It's almost foreseeable that this war will involve a significant number of dragon riders. Last summer, The mere 7 remaining dragon riders in Wessex inflicted heavy casualties on 6,000 Vikings. This time, facing the Duke of Corsica, Jerome had no idea how many of these powerful flying creatures he would bring with him. The combined efforts of the two provinces showed that the suzerain was truly enraged. He was determined to annihilate all resistance in Normandy. Jerome frowned, remaining silent for a long time. It's true that all nations harbored a negative impression of France, and Normandy was indeed popular. But to what avail? The vast disparity in power between the two nations was starkly evident. Master Dean, you are a serious man, but things may not be as bad as you think. As long as you can win the first battle and let these people who have long been oppressed by the French nobles see hope of overthrowing tyranny, you will definitely find that you have many more friends than you think. Chapter 443 The Eve of the War. Before dawn, Egbert, donning his hood and once again disguising himself as a merchant, departed from the rainy heights. Jerome stood on the balcony of the Duke's palace, quietly bidding him farewell. He could tell Egbert had no ulterior motive. He was truly delivering a message to the other 6 rulers. If the 7 kingdoms could escape Plantagenet rule, their annual tax revenue would at least double. No one wanted these blood-sucking worms to remain in their already modestly wealthy states for long. Given the opportunity, they would undoubtedly do everything in their power to escape Plantagenet's commercial control. Meanwhile, the disparity in power between the 7 kingdoms of England and France was starkly apparent. Provoking the powerful French duchy would be futile for the weak and impoverished. They dared not actively side with the Vikings, fearing defeat and the prospect of even harsher trade sanctions. It was common sense. Now, the 7 rulers could only pin their hopes on the thousands of troops in Normandy, hoping they could perform miracles as they had in the past. Jerome had no confidence in this prospect. Because the master of the greatest miracle, Loki, was not currently in the province. Over the next few days, Satyr, Glor, Phoenix, and Mokrash, vassals from the Normandy region, arrived one after another with their respective troops. Jerome's chosen gathering place was once again Fortress Watch, the capital of Salt County. This was due to its convenient location on the coastline and the fact that Duchess Elizabeth was pregnant and unaware of Loki's capture by the French. She continued to wait daily for his return. Jerome didn't want to cause too much trouble in Stone Forest County. The most difficult thing in the world is a young woman about to be widowed after a recent marriage. Especially when she's pregnant. The mere thought of it made Jerome's head spin. For the gentle Duchess, it was best to keep this matter a secret until the dust settled. All the vassals, responding to the omen, once again flocked to the seaside castle, where Fortress Watch was already filled with temporary camping tents. Strolling through the land, Jerome found the Vikings familiar. 3 years earlier, 30 hunters from Hanshu village had bravely taken up arms against 500 shield axemen sent by Duke Bernard. Now, facing an enemy 10 times their number, they again showed no signs of hostility. Upon hearing that Duke Loki had fallen into enemy hands, all the Normans who had been away returned within a month. Even those who had already established new homes abroad did not hesitate to lead their men to join this epic battle. The Vikings gathered in small groups within the camp. They spread linen towels on the ground and shared fine wines, fruits, and exotic foods from all over the western continent with their companions. Those who had been assigned boats shared secrets and anecdotes of their experiences on the vast sea. When they drank, they would pull out bizarre instruments and play, inviting the 10 female dancers to join them. As for the tribesmen who had received land and remained in the 2 provinces, they donated their long accumulated grain to the military camp. Almost everyone gave without reservation. They knew that if they lost a battle, the grain stored in the granaries would only benefit those French bastards. My dear friends, in the heat of the moment, a shirtless, long-haired man leaped onto the roof with a thud. His silhouette was silhouetted against the campfire. It was Rolf, the walker, who had just come to the aid of Cloud Province. Praise Odin for bringing us another slaughter. Good. Everyone raised their glasses as they looked at him. Praise Thor for allowing us to meet here today. Good. Everyone echoed again. Finally, praise our Duke Loki, who single-handedly slew 72 French nobles in the Inquisition. Praise our king. Cheers. With a gulp, everyone simultaneously raised their horn cups and emptied the ale. I know all of you. Rolf smashed the ox horn goblet with his might, roaring excitedly. From the time we were teenagers, barely learning to run, we've been hunting together in the dense forests, armed with simple bone knives. When we came of age, we entered the beast cages. Slaughtered direwolves. Lined up, the old duke bestowed armlets and women, and granted the right to plunder at sea. I know each of your faces, just as I know the gods of Asgard, just as I know my own parents. In a few days, if I can ascend to Valhalla with you all, what could be more exciting than brothers living together for eternity, whether dead or alive? I will always remember this day." Jerome glanced at Archbishop Lawrence behind him. They both shook their heads in silence. The two monks, who had spent half their lives in the Holy Cathedral, did not understand the simple friendship between these northern men. This feeling was simple, direct, and pure. For them, simply being able to wield axes and fight together was ultimate joy. Amidst the excited tribesmen, feasting on bountiful wine and meat, Jerome was most surprised to find old Clint in a remote corner. Rubbing his eyes vigorously for reassurance, Jerome softly questioned Lawrence. However, even Patriarch Lawrence couldn't understand how this old man, with half his bones shattered, had managed to stand up again in such a short time. As a man in his 60s, his bones were far more fragile than those of a young man. 2 months earlier, the battle with the Deep One had shattered nearly every rib in his body. Even with Patriarch Lawrence's personal care, he would have needed to be bedridden for at least 6 months before he could walk normally. Yet, just 2 months later, he was back in the camp, clad in a bearskin and carrying a great axe. It was a medical miracle. Old Clint didn't join the boisterous gathering of his companions. Although every Viking who passed by clapped their hands on their chests and offered him the highest regards, the old man chose to sit alone by the campfire. His eyes blazed as he gazed at the flickering firelight, a complex tapestry of emotions. "Wansha, Sanji, Sigurd, Faith, brothers, wait for me in Valhalla. I'll be back with the old lizard's head." With that, he drew out the 3 axes he had slung across his back, 2 short, 1 long, and began sharpening them vigorously on the grindstone. Jerome and Lawrence exchanged a glance and sighed. They had all been abducted from Northumbria to Coldwater Village by Loki 3 years ago. In those 3 years, they had witnessed countless deaths in this village. From Ahe the Knower, to Vader, who died after drinking a potion, to Blind Mountain Blood Pigeon, who died in prison under mysterious circumstances, to the carpenter Sanji, and to the butler Wenzoff, who died in France. As veterans from Coldwater Village ascended to Valhalla one after another, Old Man Clint inevitably felt lonely. This was the most senior of the Vikings from Hanshu Village. Duke Loki usually called him Master Clint whenever he saw him. The 2 holy monks couldn't persuade a man so disrespectful that even the Duke couldn't control him. But then again, even if they could persuade him to return to his bed and rest, what good would that do? Almost everyone from the 2 provinces had gathered here, from 12-year-old children to 60-year-old men, all had taken up arms. A broken nest would inevitably destroy all its eggs. If they lost this war, they would immediately face the wrath of both the English and the French. The rulers of the 7 kingdoms of England hoped they could defeat the French, but that didn't necessarily mean the people shared their views. In the eyes of the common people, they were still invaders who had caused widespread death. They would gladly take up arms to avenge their fallen compatriots. After walking around the camp and reaching the end, Sad and Girl returned to the central camp. "We've counted and brought a total of 4,725 men, all right," Jerome replied. "Egbert has given me a clear answer. We can land near the English Channel. The enemy's forces are too numerous. Our only chance of victory is to attack them from land as they approach the coast. Half our forces will attack from land, while the other half will encircle them from the sea. Egbert won't attack directly, but he will remain as inactive as possible and provide us with all the assistance we need." "Yes," Girwal said, pointing towards the low hill outside the city, towards a lone cavalryman perched atop it. "Spies from the other 6 kingdoms are already in place. King Wessex is right. Everyone in this land has their eyes on us, even grazing antelopes on the permafrost will bite when cornered. Let us shed the first drop of blood for our French friends." The evening breeze whistled as everyone raised their glasses and emptied them. Outside the window, crows fluttered, ready to welcome the heroic spirit. Chapter 444 Duke of Lorraine. 3 days later, in the English Channel. As the iconic purple dragon circled the sky 3 times before finally landing on the pristine white beach, inside an exquisite tent on the beach, the pot-bellied Duke of Lorraine, Earl van der Kamp, lowered a silver knife and fork. On his plate sat a lemon cake soaked in honey for a day and night. Earl liked to raise his blood sugar as the sun rose in the morning. This allowed him to rest leisurely on his maid's soft waist, enjoying the morning sun in a state of half-sleep. He had barely closed his eyes, barely savoring the rich pastry melting in his mouth, when the gust of wind from the dragon's wings jolted him awake from his nap. Struggling to rise from his recliner, he extended a thick finger and unleashed a savage curse. "Fabricio, you damned old bastard, I despise you nouveau riche from the backwaters. There's an entire beach, and you had to land right next to my tent? Did your parents teach you even the most basic etiquette? Look at the civilized people of Eastland. Before meeting the prince, they always submit their business cards. Because they understand how important privacy is to civilized people. Fuck. What the hell? I'm so impressed by you, you lousy soldiers." As dragon after dragon descended from the sky, the breeze that had once been a gentle breeze suddenly turned into a gust of dry sand. The exquisite tent that Duke Earl had commanded his servants to erect on the beach overnight was nearly blown away. 4 or 5 delicate maids were even blown to the ground by the strong wind, their cries echoing from behind them. This time, Duke Earl was truly angry. "Fabricio, are you fucking crazy? We're just attacking a bunch of weak Vikings, and you need 1, 2, 350 dragons? I told you before we went out, my vassals are more than enough to crush these country bumpkins. As for you, just pull out 3 or 5 dragons and fly them around in the sky. Do you really want to burn Normandy to ashes? King Edward has given clear instructions, we can only capture cities, not damage the interior facilities. If your giant beasts burn down a few castles, how will I explain it to the king later?" Unlike the Duke of Earl, who wore luxurious robes and looked like he was covered in jewels, Fabrizio, a soldier, had a serious and formal expression. After leaping off the purple-scaled dragon's neck, he adjusted his chain mail, turned around and gently patted the dragon's head, then quickly walked towards the roaring Duke of Earl. "My Lord Duke, I understand your anxiety, but rest assured, I'm not leading my troops this time to seize territory from you. I know you hope to capture Stone Forest County to build a new palace. Rest assured, my men have little interest in this province. The Dragon Mountains in Wessex, also hilly and mountainous, are clearly a better target. As for the 50 dragons I brought with me, it's simply because they're starving. I heard from those Zoroastrian intelligence agents that our Duke Loki has mastered a new method of training the chosen. The psychic energy within them is far purer than that of the saber-tooth mercenaries of Ersold. My dragons require food of even purer psychic energy. Rather than let them perish in vain, it's better to enter their bowels and temporarily alleviate their hunger." Even after being subjected to an unprovoked barrage of abuse, Fabricio showed no anger. Lorraine, under the control of Duke Earl, was one of the richest provinces in the Duchy of France. It's thanks to Lorraine's massive tax revenues that provinces like Corsica, which produce nothing but consume vast quantities of resources annually, are able to survive. It all boils down to the old saying, a man who eats is grateful, and a man who takes is soft-hearted. In the eyes of the financial patron, everyone is a grandson. A month ago, when the Plantagenets issued a call for troops to invade Normandy, the vast majority of the 21 dukes refused. Even if they could acquire 2 provinces, no one was interested in the frigid English islands compared to the warm, humid, and perennially spring-like France. Of all the dukes, only Earl van der Kamp expressed a slight interest in Stone Forest County. His interest was entirely focused on the ancient Celtic landscapes. This extreme hedonist enjoyed building mansions in stunning locations, taking his high-class friends to live there as if on a world tour. Seeing Duke Earl secure this commission, the dukes who had initially sought to curry favor with the royal family gave up. Only Fabricio, the Duke of Corsica, managed to respond to the omen while remaining alive. He had his own difficulties. Corsica is the most abundant source of spiritual energy within the French duchy, making it an ideal breeding ground for ancient dragons. Dragons born here can reach lengths of up to 20 meters, a size even approaching that of their ancient ancestors. Over 100 years ago, the French duchy faced challenges from the Arab Empire and Visigothic pirates. However, in recent years, with the waning momentum of the Arab Empire and the growth of French power, this powerful nation has remained free of war for decades. The dragons on Corsica, lacking natural enemies and protected from war, have seen their numbers rapidly increase. With limited annual resource supplies, feeding the ever-increasing number of flying dragons has become a formidable challenge for Fabricio. After centuries of enslavement, the dragons no longer actively attack humans. However, this is only when they are well-fed and not hungry. If the island's dragons run out of food, they will still fly to other Mediterranean countries to hunt for whatever food they can find to sustain themselves. The consequences of such an action could be disastrous. If he provoked a powerful swordsman from the East continent, Fabrizio had no idea how he would end up. He braved Duke Earl's hostile gaze to force his way into the spoils because he valued the thousands of lives saved in Normandy. Transporting these chosen ones, rich in psychic energy, would alleviate the urgent need for hundreds of dragons on the island. He carefully explained this to the irritable Duke Earl several times, but he continued to shake his chubby head like a rattle. No. Absolutely not. King Edward has clearly stated that no city can be destroyed. I suspect our king must have lost something precious to these shameless pirates. My soldiers can enter the city to retrieve his relics, but if your dragon knights are deployed, the flames will ignite and everything will be destroyed. If the city is burned down, how can we fulfill our king's orders? Fabrizio chuckled softly, remaining non-committal. This wasn't his first day as an official, and he was well versed in the rules of the game in high society. Behind all the righteous slogans like "for the country," "for the king," "for the flame of human civilization," there were hidden agendas. All 21 dukes knew that while Earl van der Kamp claimed to want control of Stone Forest County, his true goal had always been a single goal: the portal to the sunken city, controlled by Loki. Chapter 445 Giants Attack 1. In Loki's hand lay a portal leading to a magnificent underwater city. This wasn't a truly earth-shattering secret in the western continent. During the Slavic invasion of England 2 years prior, Satyr had sailed eastward across the Baltic Sea, stowing all the Vikings he found within the Slavic provinces into a portal. Every Viking who participated in that year's eastward raid had entered this magnificent underwater city. And these Vikings weren't exactly known for keeping secrets. After returning to their villages, they boasted about their discovery over a few glasses of ale, joined by their companions. Any member of the firebenders hidden in Scandinavia, regardless of their hearing, could report this news to their superiors. While Stonewood County, located on the border of Wessex and Mercia, offered unique scenery, similar features were not uncommon across the western continent. Earl van der Kamp owned dozens of properties across various countries in the western continent. At this moment, ordinary scenery held no appeal to him. What he truly desired was a portal leading to this magnificent underwater city. To do this, he had to ensure that the troublemaker who had suddenly appeared beside him would not enter the city to compete for the spoils. Everything he did was to gain limited access to the city to plunder. Although Fabrizio, the Duke of Corsica, had explained to the point of dizziness, it still did not dispel Duke Earl's concerns. The maid, extending a short, thick, white, and soft hand, handed him an exquisite brass bell. She gently shook the bell. 3 heavily armored cavalrymen in silver armor immediately ran up from the tent. On their chests, they wore the rose emblem, a symbol of blood and fire. Each flower had 4 petals, indicating that each of them was a centurion. They controlled the main force of the Lorraine region, the Order of the Rose. Fabrizio, listen to me, we'll cross the strait tomorrow. Your dragons had better stay in the sky. Wait until my men have chopped these barbarians to pieces, and then you can enjoy a delicious buffet. Also, from now on, make sure these ugly lizards disappear from my sight. Don't let them get within 10 kilometers of me again. You've ruined my precious seaside morning. Stop trying to disrupt my afternoon. Get out of here. Fabrizio's face darkened. He was a proud dragon rider, the continent's top fighter. If he could mobilize 50 dragon riders, it would only take 2 hours for him to reduce the entire Stone Forest and Salt County provinces to a fiery inferno. Given another 15 minutes, it wouldn't be too difficult to reduce the 10,000 rose knights brought by Duke Earl to charcoal. Gritting his teeth, he finally bowed his head and retreated. If a battle broke out, he would be the sharpest blade in the Duchy of France. Unfortunately, this country hasn't seen a major war in decades. France's most powerful weapon has never been dragons, but the merchants' warehouses, cargo ships, and the mountains of gold coin stored in the Chamber of Commerce. 90% of the country's income comes from the merchants' iron-fisted policies, which exploit other nations. In the world of fame and fortune, where politicians thrive, Fabrizio, a military veteran, remains a nobody. This is a completely different world. In this world, Fabrizio, unable to make money, has no right to resist. The dragon, having just landed, soared back into the air, disappearing into the clouds within minutes. After having his servants rearrange the tent and furnish the cushions, Duke Earl lay down again to enjoy the last vestiges of the morning seaside. He must use his lightning-fast tactics to eliminate this competitor, Fabrizio, from his side. He is already 51 years old. Though the Van der Kamp family amassed $1 trillion fortune, all this was futile in the face of time. The time he had left at the Holy Lord base to enjoy was limited. In the few decades remaining, he wanted to see more sights he had never seen before and visit more places he had never been to. He was determined to capture the mysterious sunken city. The dragon's landing was merely a minor incident in the early morning. Seeing Fabricio's obedient departure, Duke Earl's mood brightened. The haze that had just washed over him by the yellow sand was swept away. He ordered the slaves to carry away the dust-covered tent, while another group of men, ready to go, brought up another load of building materials. Ding, ding, ding. In less than half an hour, another luxurious tent was erected by the sea. Whether on the march or traveling, Duke Earl was accompanied by a servant brigade of over 1,000 men. It was simply impossible for him to live in a simple tent and eat the same food as ordinary soldiers. Not to mention the carpenters who could quickly build luxurious tents. If he wished to remain on this beach until the afternoon, the stonemasons would even immediately begin constructing 3 fire-generating stoves and a simple oven. This would allow the 72 chefs accompanying the expedition to be fully utilized. Whatever dish Duke Earl desired tonight, they would be prepared immediately. The Duke of France was renowned for his wealth. Among this group, the Van de Camp family, with their ostentatious outings, could not be considered extravagant. At best, they were middle class. They must always live the life of a wealthy family. This way, their skills would demonstrate the power of the Duchy of France and intimidate their allies. Stepping on a fine carpet from the Arab province of Tabriz, with its exquisite weaving technique of 60 knots per centimeter, the soles of his feet felt even softer than silk. The sundial showed it was not yet 9 o'clock. Seeing that the sun still had some time before it would become fierce, the maid spread the Persian blanket on the lounge chair and helped Duke Earl to lie down again. Soft, white hands smeared aromatic oils from Treacherous on his exposed skin, gently applying them. "Hey, good boy." Patting the fair cheek of the maid beside him, Duke Earl picked up the brass bell and rang it again. The ringing was random and irregular, but the butler, hidden 8 meters behind him, still accurately grasped his meaning. A bunch of clear mare's milk grapes were placed on a silver plate and brought up by the butler himself. The maid gently broke off a grape and was about to place it into Duke Earl's mouth. Suddenly, a simple longboat appeared in the azure sea and blue sky before him. Duke Earl blinked hard, realizing that the longboat was still lingering in his eye sockets not far away. He rubbed his eyes. This was no hallucination. Startled, he pushed away the maid kneeling to serve him. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 446 Giants Attack, 2. The longship spun across the sea at breakneck speed, yet no sails were hoisted, and no oars extended from the sides. Furious and frightened, Duke Earl had no time to ponder the question, why could this thing move on the sea? Anything out of the ordinary must be demonic. Years of survival experience taught him that when something incomprehensible occurred, there was no need for curiosity, no hesitation, and no need for hesitation. The only way to escape was to flee. Pushing aside the wailing maid, Duke Earl, clad only in silk shorts, ran barefoot towards the butler hidden behind him. The short 30 meters seemed incredibly far away. Halfway through the run, a low humming sound suddenly erupted from behind him. It sounded somewhere between beast and human. Trembling, he turned back and saw a dark blue giant over 10 meters tall. He carried a Viking longship on his shoulders and crouched behind him, staring intently at him with a pair of orange eyes as large as wheels. Saliva cascaded from the corners of his mouth. "Master Alfred is starving. We've been without food for months, and have been walking on the seabed for over 10 days. If we don't eat something, my people will starve to death on this beach. Although we promised the Duke not to devour humans when we left Jotunheim, we're truly starving now. Never mind, let's start with a soft, fat creature." Duke Earl understood the giant's Viking language and recognized it as a frost giant depicted in ancient texts. However, when a true old god appeared before him, the terrifying psychic pressure terrified him so much that he urinated and defecated, unable to move. Even more terrifying was the sight of more blue-skinned giants emerging from the water on the shoreline not far behind them. As soon as they reached shore, they stretched out their massive hands to grab the maids, cooks, and black-skinned slaves running along the beach. Once caught, they immediately stuffed them into their mouths and chewed them with delight. "Oh my god! What the hell is that?" You still have the time to ask questions. Run. The first to break into a run were the black slaves on standby. These nimble hunters from the Black Desert of the northern continent had been sold by their chieftain to the French nobles as servants. Despite their menial duties, their tenacious survival instincts in the Black Desert had not been lost. Stretching their sturdy black legs, they desperately tried to escape the giants chasing them. Unfortunately, the mighty ancient gods were no match for the jackals and hyenas of the Black Desert. Landing, the frost giants opened their arms and blew gently at the fleeing crowd. A pale blue wave spread out like ripples, spreading across the bodies of those fleeing on the beach, quickly forming a foot-long layer of frost on their skin. The servants, who had been running furiously, were instantly frozen to the ground, unable to move a single step. The excited frost giants chuckled. They broke off one frozen ice sculpture after another from the frozen ground, popping them into their mouths with a crunching slurry, like chewing on a crisp apple. King Orlan, it feels so good. Although dragons are delicious, it's been ages since I've enjoyed a living human. Once in a while, it's not bad. 10,000 years, it's been 10,000 years since I've tasted this fresh, slightly salty flesh. Praise Lofi, praise Far Beauty, haha, don't worry, there's plenty more to come. Master Alfred promised us this time, we'll have endless dragons to enjoy. These living humans are just appetizers. Large streams of blood and bone shards flowed from the corners of their mouths, and those still conscious even howled in agony. The white, silent beach was quickly covered in crimson blood. Only then did the trembling Dew girl notice a nimble figure leaping from the longship. Glancing disdainfully at Earl's white flesh, Alfred reached out and grasped his greasy neck. You look like a duke, right? Tell me how to summon your dragon army. Everything was happening so fast that Duke Earl's mind was still in a state of extreme confusion. Alfred glanced imperceptibly at Orlan Avalanche behind him, turned his back, and hugged him. My dear French brother, don't pretend you don't understand English. You eat, wear, and use everything you need by harvesting us English leeks. So you must understand our language. Listen carefully. I'm here to help you. Only fire-breathing dragons can defeat these lawless ancient gods. Tell me how to summon the dragon army. If they arrive early, you and I might still be able to save our lives. Earl stretched out his hand stiffly, pointing to several exquisite wooden boxes in a corner of the beach. Several firecrackers crafted by Tang artisans protruded from the wooden box. Alfred smiled and nodded, then, in a flash of lightning, pierced Earl's heart. Thank you. Remember to thank me when you go to hell. At least you, old man, have an intact body. In the Inquisition, Diamond-flowered Durand and Grand Inquisitor Ethan von Klaun both fell to his sword. Too many lice won't bite, and too many debts won't worry. He was already an unforgivable demon, so a few more kills wouldn't matter. Sharply shaking off the fat on his broadsword, Alfred strode toward the fireworks. He had to summon the dragons of France immediately to fulfill his promise to the Frost Giant King. The reason was simple: the fighting capabilities of these blue-skinned giants were far greater than he had imagined. At the docks of Dragon's Breath Plateau, after he and Alicel had discarded all the food they had prepared for the giants, they were greeted by a group whose eyes were red with hunger. Alfred stepped forward and personally promised the Frost Giant King, Avalanche Orlan, that he would lead them to land devoured by dragons. The entire tribe of frost giants immediately emerged from the mountains and walked all the way to the seabed. It was only then that Alfred realized that these powerful monsters seemed to have no need to breathe. He floated alone on the surface of the sea in a longboat, while the giants walked on the seabed, pulling at the longboat's anchor. In this way, like flying a kite, Alfred reached the English Channel in just 3 days. Seeing fully armed warships patrolling the sea, the French Navy barely had time to respond before the frost giants, along with their ships and crew, froze into a block of ice and dragged them ashore. The vast gulf in combat power between humans and the ancient gods was laid bare before Alfred's eyes. He had seen the ancient gods recorded in the volumes of the Pantheon. Most of them were survivors of the War of the Gods 5,000 years ago. Even a few of them were considered lucky. Even if a single ancient god survived the wilderness ruins, the Royal Academy or the Holy Bishop would have to dispatch thousands of troops to annihilate them. Alfred had no idea how much damage 2,000 frost giants could inflict. Therefore, he had to fulfill his promise immediately. He needed to summon the dragons of France immediately. Chapter 447 Giants Attack, 3. Brilliant fireworks shot up into the sky, exploding in a dazzling crimson cloud. Before he could even fly away, Fabricio turned back, his eyes once again filled with confusion. What on earth was this old man trying to do? He was the one who had ordered us off the coast, then walked away after obeying, and then he was the one who signaled us to return. Did he really think we soldiers were bitches to be summoned and dismissed at will? As a proud dragon rider, Fabricio had a temper. He hovered his dragon in mid-air. He hesitated for a long time whether to obey the girl's orders. After a long pause, he sighed deeply and ultimately decided to return. The only thing in the world that could make him bow down to them was the flocks of flying dragons on Corsica. Think of the dragon language scholars, often ridiculed by their tribe for their low income, and the dragon keepers on the island, constantly risking their lives to earn rations. To ensure the dragons and their tribe continued to have enough food for the coming year, he had no choice but to comply with all of Earl's demands. Zile, let's go back. He gently tapped the dragon's horns twice. The purple scale dragon beneath him, understanding its master's command, let out a resounding roar. The remaining 30 dragon riders in the sky halted their flight in unison. The dragons, each with their scales of varying colors, turned and gathered around him again. Forming themselves into a neat formation, the 50 dragons swooped down from the snow-white clouds. Just as they emerged from the clouds, Fabricio was greeted by a scarlet beach now soaked in blood. My omniscient and almighty lord, what are these? Are these giants surviving from ancient times? How could there be so many of them? In the French Principality, every dragon rider capable of riding a dragon must attend the War Academy from a young age to receive a thorough chivalric education. Fabricio was well aware of the ancient gods hidden within the human world, as well as the giants and dragons that ruled the world during the previous civilization. Squinting his eyes, he saw that the number of deep blue giants above the ground was approaching 2,000. Thousands of ancient gods simultaneously attacked human civilization. This situation was rarely recorded in the archives of the scholars. Where had they hidden themselves, evading the ancients' encirclement of the ancient gods? High in the sky, before he could command his dragon to descend, a horde of frost giants emerged from the sea and attacked the Order of the Rose led by Duker. True, the frost giants, following in the footsteps of Loki and Surtur, had lost the twilight of the gods. They had been imprisoned in the sun prison of Jotunheim for 10,000 years. But remember, in Asgard, they faced their creators, the Aesir, who had ruled the divine realm for millions of years. Now, the giants faced humans, thousands of years later, severely degenerated. The battle between the frost giants and the Order of the Rose was a crushing defeat. The attack of these blue-skinned ancient gods was simple. 1. Freeze them. 2. Trample them, or devour them. Every member of the frost giant tribe was a master of both magic and martial arts. Magical elementals, difficult for humans to control, would docilely obey their commands. This was especially true for the water elementals that pervaded the heavens and earth, which the frost giants manipulated with ease. This was bad news for humans. Nearly 70% of a mortal's weight was pure water. When icy ripples drifted through the air, foot-long cones of ice instantly formed on every human body. This was the result of the freezing cold of the free water elemental air upon contact with a human body. When a person was completely covered in the cones of ice, their blood froze. In a matter of seconds, the cavalry, along with their horses and the wet sand beneath them, were transformed into ice sculptures. Descend, quickly, we must not allow these monsters to leave the beach. They are demons that control ice and frost. Only the dragon's fire can harm them. In times of crisis, a warrior's instincts told Fabricio that it was time to act. Countless ancient gods lurked in the dark corners of the world, and many void portals from ancient times still functioned. Although the species of these blue-skinned giants was unknown, monsters that manipulated ice were generally weak to fire. The dragons accompanying him, though only 50 in number, should be useful. Upon hearing the Lord's command, the dragon riders formed a wedge-shaped attack formation in midair. The 50 dragons, like sharp arrows, charged towards the ground, their fully extended wings creating a hurricane-like force. The frost giants looked up. They showed no fear, but rather joy. 7 months ago, when Loki released the 70 subspecies of dragons captured from the Flying Dragon Mountains, the frost giants discovered that their former nemesis, like the humans on this planet, had undergone a significant decline over tens of thousands of years. In the 70 subspecies of dragons, the frost giants could find no trace of the Dragon King's bloodline. Pouring the divine water collected from the sunlight prison into their mouths would, at best, result in the transformation of a few very weak blue dragons. While these creatures could barely qualify as ancient dragons, In ancient times, they were a formidable species, relegated to the uninhabited pirates of the deep sea. 10,000 years ago, after humanity, under the leadership of Nuwa, successfully sealed the outer Gout's passage into human civilization, not only the giants but also the dragons were purged. Only on extremely remote islands in the ocean did a few remnants of ancient dragons remain. However, survival does not guarantee prosperity. 10,000 years of inbreeding have left these remaining dragons barely even a tenth of their ancestors' power. Let these creatures face the frost giants. Don't fight. Simply hearing their deep roars is enough to scare these subspecies of dragons to their core. After 2 low roars, the fear that emanated from their bones began to spread. The dragons hovered in midair, resisting the dragon rider's commands. At that moment, their eyes were fixed on the pairs of orange eyes on the ground, and the greed they gleamed within. Though they had never seen such creatures since birth, the fear of their ancestors' hundreds of thousands of years of slaughter by giants was still deeply etched in their genes. At this moment, hundreds of frost giants on the ground made a unified movement. They raised their left hands high in the air, and violent, icy water elementals began to gather in their palms. In a matter of seconds, the once empty air condensed into one snow-white ice spear after another. Hundreds of giants unleashed a wave of ice spikes in unison. 50 dragons in the sky were instantly shattered into 50 explosions of blood. Chapter 448 Giants Attack, 4. That's all? It's too little. Master Alfred, Giant King Orlan wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, still struggling to resist the intense hunger in his stomach. Within the sunlight cages custom built for them by the Aesir, they could easily obtain abundant food rich in psionic energy. The purpose of this prison wasn't to destroy their physical bodies, but to minimize the frost giants' killing instinct. This was the group consciousness they had cultivated over hundreds of thousands of years of desperate struggle against Earth's dragons, their ancestors, and the outer gods. After leaving the cage, the regained freedom was truly refreshing. The feeling of consuming the tiny humans who had once slaughtered them was also incredibly comforting. But the lingering hunger, like a maggot in the tarsal bone, didn't seem to be alleviated at all. The food of the old gods was completely different from that of humans. The degraded human body no longer craves psionic energy, but the frost giants, who manipulate the elements, are almost entirely composed of pure psionic energy. To quench the hunger deep in their veins, they needed to consume abundant food rich in psionic energy. While the Rose Knights under Girl were well equipped, in terms of sheer strength, most of these cavalrymen were Sequence 9 or Sequence 8 in the war order, lacking any psychic energy to support the use of their extraordinary abilities. Even if these soldiers were strung together on a knight's lance and eaten like candied haws, they would barely fill the giant's stomach. This behavior is similar to humans eating dirt during a disaster. It might satisfy a stomachache, but it solves no practical problem. The battle has just begun. These few dozen are just their vanguard. I'm sure there are more dragons waiting behind, Alfred said with a smile. We just need to head south, flattening every city along the way, and they will naturally appear before us. Fortunately, the frost giants created by the god King Odin spoke the Viking language, the common language of the Vikings, and he could communicate seamlessly with them in this newly learned language. Alfred had already gathered all the warm clothing he could find on the beach. Although it was midsummer, traveling with the frost giants kept him constantly shrouded in the cold. Rumors abound throughout the western continent that the Duchy of France possesses at least 300 dragon riders. I don't know if this is true, but for now, this is the only way to appease these hungry giants. These noble gentlemen better conjure up those 300 flying dragons. Otherwise, if the dragons don't come, Alfred knows what will happen to him. The scene unfolding before him instantly made him understand why, for tens of thousands of years, human civilization has employed various methods to prevent the entry of the outer gods into Earth. Forget fighting back. Most mortals wouldn't even be food in front of them. They'd be like ants crawling on the ground. What's happening across the water? Why has there been no movement for so long? A dead silence. On the other side of the English Channel, Jerome, Satyr, Glor, and the Wessex Captain Vanzelis, disguised as an attendant, all stood on the surface of the sea. The Normans were waiting in full force, having waited for a long time. Since last month, the Duchy of France and Wessex have halted all commercial shipping across the Channel. News of Loki and Alfred's feat of slaughter within the Inquisition, slaughtering the head of the Chamber of Commerce, a judge, and over 70 French nobles, has spread like wildfire throughout the western continent. Bards daily sing the heroic tales of these wild men and their murderous rampage, driving ale sales in taverns through the roof. Recently, the channel has been practically teeming with large French warships and troop transports. Everyone knows that the war that hinges the fate of both nations will soon begin. However, after 3 long days, the seas have gradually shifted from crowded to quiet. In particular, in the last 24 hours, the proud French have withdrawn all their warships, leaving a vast expanse of empty waters for the Vikings to await. This feels eerie, as if something significant has occurred within the Duchy of France. "Archmaster Jerome, please be patient," said Vanzelis, the Wessex captain disguised as an ordinary Viking, behind Jerome. "Please wait for the Moa knights who are out to explore the way. Although our allies dislike being spied on, Wessex cannot miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." The phrase "appearance close, heart apart" perfectly captures the relationship between Wessex and the Duchy of France. Vanzelis's militia were hidden in the hills dozens of kilometers away. Egbert's plan was to sit back and watch the clash. If France fell into a state of exhaustion, these allies would immediately defect and join the slaughter. To ensure the destruction of the dragon in the sky, Mercia's acting ruler, Lancelot, even specially transported 30 rapid-fire ballistas and deployed them along the coastline 10 days in advance. If the Vikings showed any sign of defeating their formidable foe, the powerful weapons crafted by the Mahas school would be instantly turned against the dragon in the sky. What was happening now was beyond anyone's expectations. Although Vanzelis desperately hoped for thunder to rain down from the sky, smiting the proud French knights, after all, one cannot live on illusions. He needed to immediately ascertain what was happening across the strait, so that these powerful enemies, who could easily crush them, would give up any thought of attacking. A gentle breeze blew over the sea. Vikings were never known for their patience. As the blazing afternoon sun rose, they quickly shifted from full of battle to cursing and swearing. Just as the entire battle line was about to break apart, 3 tiny figures flew from the sky. The Moa knights landed and immediately ran to Vanzelis. "Report. All the French nobles and Rose knights on the other side are dead. We've even found the remains of a giant dragon on the shore." With that, the scout removed a broken dragon claw from its back. The claw was visible, like a gnawed chicken claw, the tough scales and flesh stripped away, leaving only a miserable bone. There were still flecks of frost hanging on it. Frost? Jerome reached out and touched it. It felt cold, indeed, like it had been frozen. However, it was already summer in France and Wessex, and such temperatures were absolutely unsuitable for this season. He exchanged a glance with Vangelis beside him, and each of them saw only a deeper sense of confusion in the other's eyes. Chapter 449, English Plunderers, 1. Don't be afraid of a thing. We've come here today, with our families, to offer the gods a spectacular battle. This is the first battle I, Old Mo, will participate in since I've regained the dukedom. You can leave if you want, but I'm absolutely not going back. No matter what, I'm going to take a few shits on the land of those French bastards before I leave." The first person in the crowd to completely lose his patience was 52-year-old Duke Angus Macklash. From the loss of the Dragon's Breath Plateau to the recapture of the river valley, this old pirate has been through a lot in the past 3 years. In his heart, everything he has now is a gift from the god King Odin. The loss and recovery of territory and power makes him cherish every opportunity to demonstrate his power before the gods. Moreover, in this position, more gold is always better. If even the dragon is dead, something great must have happened on French soil. Having lost his target for the autumn raid, the anxious Duke Macklash urgently needs to find new lands to plunder. In his sights, no place was more suitable than the wealthy Duchy of France. "I'll go too," echoed Duke Phoenix, standing nearby. "Our combined forces would number about 2,000, so we could at least look after each other." What he didn't say was, the French nobles have so much gold, more than enough to feed both of us. The Duke of Salcher, Phoenix Coldstone, was the most business-minded of all Loki's vassals. Unlike Macklash, who spent his days raking in a great axe, Phoenix's father was a highly accomplished Varangian mercenary. Their abundant silver allowed them to attend a missionary school, where they grew up surrounded by the children of merchants. Upon reaching adulthood, his sister, Lady Coldstone, returned to Frost Ridge to inherit the title, while Phoenix continued to work as a merchant in the Mediterranean. It was only after his sister's death in Frost Ridge that he returned to Scandinavia to take over the dukedom. When Phoenix returned, the Frost folk of Frost Ridge, led by Lady Coldstone, had, after more than a decade, mastered the art of hunting humpback whales and refining whale oil, transforming it into a major industry. Even after following Loki to Sea-Watch, Phoenix had no intention of abandoning this source of income. Whale oil is an essential ingredient in the production of soap, high-end pigments, and lubricants. The demand for whale oil among the inhabitants of the western continent was so great that this scarce commodity was always in high demand. To secure a larger share of the oil, workshop owners in Paris resorted to bribing Abbot Francis. Sensing a business opportunity, Phoenix needed a large amount of gold to expand his whaling fleet, and he was willing to take a risk. Opportunity always comes to those who are willing to fight to the death. With the two dukes leading the charge, the Vikings could no longer hold their ground. Rolf the Walker and Goutman the Porcupine, the prominent pirates of the valley, joined the two. When this happened, Jerome could not help but marvel once again at Loki's talent. He truly didn't have the talent to organize such a disorganized and impulsive group. Could the French have set a trap on the other side and waited for them to arrive? It was possible, but not likely. First, they knew the sheer number of troops the two provinces of Normandy could muster. With overwhelming superiority, they didn't need to resort to such strategies. Second, for the proud French, slaying their proud dragon, sacrificing hundreds of soldiers, and turning the entire coastline into a bloodbath, something the cunning Arabs could do, not the French. It was completely out of character for them. When all possibilities were eliminated, the only remaining theory, however illogical, remained the truth. Could it be that the French army across the way was truly annihilated by some mysterious irresistible force? Everyone exchanged bewilderment, ultimately acquiescing to their subordinates' impulsive actions. Long ships were carried from the dense forest and thrown into the sea. Soon, nearly 300 long ships were fully loaded. Compared to the excited Vikings, the Wessex captain, Vanzelus, was noticeably more cautious. His name suggested he wasn't a native of the English Isles. He hailed from a small fishing village called Amsterdam, just outside the French duchy, and had long been engaged in smuggling across the English Channel. If Loki's men hadn't decimated all the professional soldiers in Wessex last autumn, this well-established smuggler wouldn't have even been able to ascend to the rank of captain. Egbert's promotion was a matter of necessity. Wessex had long emulated the French duchy's ruling style, prioritizing merchants and farmers and controlling the other 6 kingdoms through a powerful commercial monopoly. As for combat power, with the dragon riders in place, Egbert didn't focus much on the army. With all his reliable knights and generals dead, he looked around and found that among all his vassals, only this lawless smuggler had any experience raising a private army. Compared to the academics of the War College, Vanzelus undoubtedly possessed a certain wildness that came with his humble roots. After years of moving like a rat across the channel, caution and Loki had become 2 symbols deeply engraved in his bones. Bowing and bidding farewell to Jerome and his men, Vanzelus mounted his stilt horse and galloped back to the valley where the Wessex militia were hiding. As soon as he dismounted, his first order was to relaunch the Moa Knights. Listen up, you all follow closely behind these crazy Vikings and keep a close eye on them to see if they encounter any resistance along the way. If there is really no resistance along the way, if the French troops are really hit by some kind of mysterious power, don't hesitate, turn around and send a signal immediately. After living for most of my life, I found that there is nothing impossible in this world. Maybe their Lord Odin is so happy in the sky that he comes down to earth himself to beat these French bastards to death. Do you understand? Hurry and set off. After the Moa Knight retreated, he turned to look at the naval centurion beside him and issued a second order. Prepare the boats for me immediately. Any boat will do, even civilian fishing boats or even simple bamboo rafts. As long as they can float on the sea, recruit them all. I need a ship that can transport all 100,000 militiamen to the other side of the strait. If you can get these 100,000 men across safely, I'll give you credit for this battle. The naval captain under Vanzelus's command had, just 3 months ago, been his smuggling lord. Although these men came from the common people had their advantages. They were much more efficient than the regular army, which received government funding. After everyone left, Vanzelus turned to the 15 militia chiefs behind him. This was when Egbert signaled the militia. The militia chiefs from the major prefectures, though none of them wore armor, each commanded tens of thousands of militiamen. I'll leave the most important tasks to you, Vanzelus blinked vigorously, as if he had made up his mind. Tell your militia to throw away their pitchforks and hoes and each take 5, maybe 10, sacks. It doesn't matter what material it is, as long as it can hold things. If you don't have linen at home, You can make 10 makeshift sacks out of sheets and curtains. I only have 2 requests, more and faster. Chapter 450, English Plunderers, 2. For 28 years, Vangelis had been a smuggler. He began as a humble fishmonger in Amsterdam. Initially, he stuffed precious spices, glass, gunpowder, and other sought-after goods into fish intestines and smuggled them from the French port of Calais to Wessex. This allowed him to evade the trade taxes imposed by the French Merchants' Union. Over the course of 20 years, his business grew rapidly, eventually bribed 80% of the French sailors at Calais with gold coins. He could openly load these sought-after goods onto cargo ships and ship them to various countries in the English Isles. In this process, Vangelis discovered a simple truth: quantitative change is far more important than qualitative change. Granted, if he and his cousin sailed across the English Channel in a dilapidated fishing boat, he could pocket an 80% profit from the goods hidden in the fish intestines. But what good would that do? A fishing boat could only carry 500 kilograms of fish at best. He and his cousin toiled for a year, their profits only earning them 300 gorse leaves. But if they shifted their focus and shared the profits with the sailors and trade commissioners at Calais, the outcome would be very different. Perhaps the majority of the profits from each shipment would go to the French Navy, leaving him with only 0.5%. But a French brig could carry 2 tons of cargo. With the support of the sailors and officials, he could sail 30 brigs twice a month. Even if he only kept 0.5%, that would still be tens of thousands of gorse leaves. This is the huge advantage of scale. Similarly, only 4,000 Vikings crossed the English Channel. But at this time, he had 100,000 men under his command. If the French army were truly wiped out, even if the Vikings entered the city first and swept away the gold and silver, they would still have a vast store of valuable goods hidden in warehouses, homes, churches, and shop basements. The reason was simple: the French city was too vast and too rich. Even with only 4,000 Vikings, even if each had 8 hands, they couldn't move all the wealth they had accumulated over the years. Furthermore, these unsophisticated people only cared about gold and silver. They had no idea of French textiles, spices, books, Tang Dynasty porcelain, Arabic steel, or even the French cheese stored in the kitchens. Every piece could be brought back to Vangelis's smuggling ship and converted into silver coins. If there's a chance, we'll wait until those idiots finish their looting, then lead the militia into the city. If we can find some good stuff, haha, why would we even farm this year? Everyone, let's go treasure hunting in France. With over 1 million militiamen pouring into this country, even if we encounter an army, we can fight. The residents who participated in the looting took 30%, leaving 40% for Egbert. I'll give the advice: move the goods, and take the remaining 30%, no problem, haha. If that really happens, we'll make a killing. Looking at the map of France beside him, especially the image of Paris with its magnificent castle, Vangelis could no longer control his greed. If only I could get into Paris, hehe. No, I'd have to prepare some sacks too. Meanwhile, across the English Channel, as Duke Macrash and Duke Phoenix stepped off their longship, they saw a coastline soaked in blood. The French coastline, stretching from west to east, was littered with shattered armor and severed limbs. Schools of sharks roamed the dark crimson sea. They hungrily prowled the shoreline, greedily searching for human remains beneath the surface. Something seems amiss, said Old Man Clint, enduring the stinging pain. He bent down, scooped up the salty water, and sniffed it. It smells of blood, but not of human. Could it be possible that something could devour 10,000 French cavalrymen, horses and all? Duke Macrash, leading his troops along the beach, also wondered. He held a shattered knight's shield in his hands, carefully examining the cracks. Ander, look at this, isn't it? Yes. Duke Maclash's younger brother, Ander Maclash, immediately leaned over. Brother, you're right, this is a row of indentations. Even a mortal, even one who had cultivated to the power of a demigod, would find it utterly impossible to rip through a Damascus steel shield with a Muhammad marking with their teeth. Furthermore, the center of this shield was nearly 3 inches thick. Yet, these teeth marks were as clean as a crisp carrot, leaving behind a single bite. The marks revealed the narrow gaps between the teeth, the varying sizes of the teeth, and even the curves of the teeth, all perfectly preserved. If they could gnaw through a shield like this in one bite, then based on the size of their heads, I'm afraid the giants who suddenly attacked the French knights were between 10 and 12 meters tall. Converting that to me, the chosen of Valhalla, the 3 giant paths would have to be at least sequence 3 or higher to achieve this size. Now, He looked back at the crimson beach before him. Even though the two brothers had spent most of their lives wielding axes and reveling in plunder, a chill ran down their spines. Duke Mocklash knew exactly what this group was. Earlier this spring, Loki had led him, Merindon, and other dukes from Scandinavia into the Frost Giants' territory. He had seen these terrifying giants before and understood their origins. He had never imagined that Loki's capture by the French would scare these formidable creatures across the sea. Though these French knights were their enemies, the deep-seated human subconscious still told them they were their compatriots. When one mortal saw another being slaughtered in this manner by an unknown old god, no one could remain indifferent. Throwing away their shields, the two men chose to continue their march. A series of distinct footprints were etched on the blood-soaked sand. They all pointed in one direction, Calais, the largest port in the northern French duchy, on the southern side of the English Channel. The normally arrogant Vikings became wary in this crimson hell. Everyone strained their ears, straining to detect any danger. Among the crowd, only Satyr felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Though this was the bustling world, at that moment, he vaguely recalled the first time he and Loki entered that dark, underwater city. Back then, they had no idea what lay ahead. And now, like that moment, these Vikings knew nothing of what lay ahead. They knew only that they had gathered here today to fight. Odin was watching them. Today, they would wield their axes, spilling blood upon their chests. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.